the purpose to it all is that the North Koreans don't just want their capabilities to be known by U.S. intelligence services, because U.S. intelligence services are very famously tight-lipped. They don't talk about it a lot. They want to convince the public, and the publics in China, South Korea, the U.S., they really want to influence the discussion to make it clear that they have nuclear weapons, and they don't want people to forget that. And they want that to be part of the discussion always, because it makes them seem bigger, essentially.
TD MacDonald, welcome to the Auxoro podcast. So, along with James Acton and Pranay Vadi, am I pronouncing that right? You recently published a report titled Reimagining Nuclear Arms Control. And nuclear arms have been a topic of concern for scientists and military officials for decades, and the public and myself, of course, have taken a renewed interest in nuclear arms with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we're seeing these BuzzFeed style takes from everyone online, and things have been taken off all over the place with people having different takes on things. Could you lay out the top security concerns and the dangers of the current nuclear arms landscape and why we need to reimagine it?
Yeah, so I mean that's a huge question.
Yeah, but basically starting off super broad.
Yeah, all right. So sort of just to really start at the ground level, there's 9 countries in the world that have nuclear weapons. U.S. and Russia are sort of the two biggest of that. They have, I think it's 95% of the nuclear arms in the world. So each of them has about 5,000 or 6,000. They keep about 1,500 of them. Deployed, they call it. So it's on missiles or ready to be delivered by planes. And then sort of the next biggest arsenal would be China, which is we don't exactly know how many they have, but it's probably low 300s. And then UK and France are both around 200-300. And then there's Pakistan and India both have smaller arsenals, Israel as well. And then North Korea famously has the newest nuclear arsenal. So there's sort of different ways you can think about the risks that come from nuclear weapons. One is sort of the North Korea situation is a good example where small country, very hostile security environment for them. So Kim Jong-un is very worried that his regime might not last. And so they try to, backstop that by having nuclear weapons. So they can say, hey, if you guys come and try to invade me, if you try to depose me, I can use my nuclear weapons in response. And they kind of try to use that threat to keep themselves safe. So there's issues around sort of the smaller arsenals like North Korea where war might lead to nuclear use in that sense. And then there's also the sort of more Cold War style US, Russia, massive nuclear exchange destroys all the world, the entire world at once. And, the thinking is that Biden and Putin both know that nuclear war is bad for them and their country, but you might get into a situation where you're doing this tit for tat escalation. The Russians are backed into a corner, so they might try to use a nuclear weapon on a single one and try to force the other side to back off. And then the U.S. has to respond, and then they might respond back and forth. And especially once nuclear weapons start flying, all bets are off for the usual control stuff. And so that could lead into this big escalation and then a big nuclear exchange.
I just wanted to pause real quick and ask you, what was the genesis or around what time did the thinking, the primary way, the best way to defend your country would be by mutually assured destruction and basically stockpiling weapons and ensuring that if someone attacks you, you're also going to attack them and destroy them, rather than trying to de-escalate without building up this huge nuclear arsenal? Because to an outside observer, to an extreme unexpert like myself, it seems like the strategy is, instead of try to de-escalate a street fight, if you're going to compare the nuclear arms race to getting in a street fight in Brooklyn or something, it's the strategy would be to punch the guy in the face at the same time he punches you in the face. And so you're both lying on the floor, knocked out, possibly brain damage, head bounces off the concrete, rather than build the skills to be like, hey, whoa, like we could both knock each other out, but it doesn't. We don't have to constantly be threatening other people with it.
Yeah. So so really the idea isn't so much that I'm trying to punch, we're going to punch each other at the same time. It's that I'm threatening to punch you and you're threatening to punch me. And I'm saying like, don't try to take my wallet or I'll punch you. And then that gets out of hand. So like nuclear weapons first came about, end of the Second World War. Around then, late 40s, the Manhattan Project, pretty famous. A bunch of US, Canadian, British scientists got together, figured out how to make a nuclear weapon work. And then they built a couple, but back then the sort of the nuclear material, so uranium, plutonium, that stuff was super rare at the time, and they thought it was going to stay very rare. And so early on, the U.S. thought they were the only ones who would ever have nuclear weapons. And it's like 2 or 4 years later, then the Russians tested their own. So, it spread much quicker than people thought. So it wasn't until like I think it's like the 50s and the 60s that this idea, now we call it deterrence, but this idea that you threaten each other with your nuclear weapons as a way to sort of prevent each other from attacking. The problem with that is that if you get into this mindset, well, it's like, well, I just got to punch them harder or I got to punch them first. Then that pushes you to build more and more weapons so you can attack them first and one of the ideas is that you try to destroy the other side's weapons in an attack. And so to do that, you just need a lot more weapons. And then the other side is sitting there like, wow, they're building up all these weapons. I got to build more in response so that they can't disarm me or that I can disarm them. And that's what led to the arms race of the Cold War. So I think by like the 60s, there were like 60,000 nuclear weapons, mostly between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at that time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until like after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was one of like the big close calls, or relatively early on, or in the middle of the Cold War, that the U.S. and Soviets were like, this is kind of getting out of hand. Nuclear war doesn't really benefit either of those two sides. Like, they try to use it to their advantage to do this like coercion to like jockey for place, but actually getting into a nuclear war is just bad for everyone. So it was around then that they started trying to put guardrails on things and start cutting down on the number of weapons they had. And that's what arms control is.
What was the communication like at the time of the Cold War between scientists that are studying nuclear weapons and nuclear policy and then the actual policymakers and military officials? Because it's looking at the arms race, just seeing the explosive power and how a lot of it seems like emotional. It seems like if a leader was making decisions based off of pure emotions and not logic and trying to de-escalate, like if you put a teenage girl in charge of a country, and then there are a bunch of other teenagers in charge of other countries, they would say, let's build up our shit as big as possible and try to blow each other up. Like that, it seems like such a emotional, immature response. And I'm not sure I would do any better. I probably wouldn't if I was in that position, because it's hard to get out of a mindset if everyone else is trapped in it. But what was the communication style or system between scientists and between the people making decisions that affect nuclear policy?
Yeah. I mean, it's almost more of a teenage boy kind of
teenage boy. Yeah, a teenager. Like yeah, exactly. Yeah. The teenage girl would be spreading the rumors behind the backs of the leaders and trying to incite them to fight themselves, and the teenage boy would be more of, I'm going to engage you physically and blow you up directly.
So like the early on, a lot of the thinking around nuclear weapons and how to use them. So keep in mind, like nuclear weapons came out, they got used end of the Second World War, and then they were still kind of figuring out how to best use them. So early on in like the 50s, they were still thinking about, how can I use nuclear weapons as just another kind of weapon? So I think there was a lot of thinking going on around potentially using them in the Korean War. At some point, but it eventually got shut down. And sort of throughout this time, there was a group of scientists at the Rand Corporation mostly. Fred Kaplan, I think he writes for Slate now, has a really good book called The Wizards of Armageddon, all about the Rand Corporation in those days. But they're a group of people typically referred to as defense intellectuals. And so they were thinking about sort of how do you use nuclear weapons, but like, if you accept the point that if you actually explode a nuclear weapon, like if you use it in dropping it on someone, then you can, again, run into this sort of runaway nuclear exchange once the other side has nuclear weapons. But how do you make use of the nuclear weapons you have without actually using them is sort of the question they all settled on. So how do you like coerce your adversaries because you have nuclear weapons that you don't feel you can use, because if you start using them, then the world falls apart. But how do you use the threat of them to get, to serve your political ends? And that's really where a lot of the thinking led back in those days, and led to what we call deterrence theory nowadays.
So there's a strategic pressure to it. You're building. Carefully seems like the wrong word, but you're building strategically to apply enough pressure to make another country feel like they would be much worse off if they attacked you had they not attacked you.
Yeah. So there's sort of, and then like you mentioned it doesn't feel very logical, but then once you get into these sort of ways of thinking about it, where you make a couple like key assumptions of like, the sides don't want to get into a nuclear war, then you can say very logically, like, okay, I know the Russians or the Soviets don't want to get into a nuclear war. So where's the limit of like, what can I do that is the Soviets wouldn't like, but wouldn't prevent or provoke a nuclear attack? And from the flip side, the US was thinking about like, how do I protect Paris or, Western Germany from Soviet invasion? Because back then the Soviet army was much larger, or had more conventional military power in Europe compared to the U.S. So the U.S. tried to sort of make up for that difference by using their nuclear weapons as this threat to prevent the Soviets from coming. But then you get into this point where there was a question that always got raised during the Cold War: is like, would the U.S. really go to nuclear? Like go to the bat for Europe? Would you risk Washington to save Paris, kind of thing? So there's like this whole other part of it of like, how do you make these threats of nuclear annihilation credible? How do you make the other side believe that you might do it? Usually the sort of the way that people think that you might get there, because it doesn't make sense to start a nuclear war. It's just like no one wins. So to like threaten. You don't necessarily threaten, I'm going to use nuclear weapons. You like threaten that I'm going to put us in a situation where, the tit for tat little steps push us towards nuclear escalation. And I'm going to create that risk. And if you can't handle that risk, then you'll back down and I'll win.
Okay.
But if you don't back down, it's like playing chicken, I guess, is the example everyone always uses, right? So the like nuclear thinking really thought of how do you use these nuclear threats as playing a game of chicken. And there's always the risk that no one pulls off the road on chicken and you get into a head-on crash. And that was a risk that they accepted back then. And we still do today to a degree.
Hey guys, this is a quick reminder that the two best ways you can support the show are by 1, leaving a rating and comment on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is like foreplay for the algorithm because it revs it up and makes our show appear higher in searches. And number 2, you can subscribe to Auxoro Premium at auxoro.supercast.com, where for $5 a month you get bonus episodes and more exclusive content. Thank you for however you choose to support the show. It's almost pickup artists like when I read things about pickup artists or hitting on people at bars, there's always this overarching theme of create a sense of mystery and don't share too much information right away, and that mystery has power. So it seems like there's the reality that the country has the nuclear arms, where they're stored, the capabilities, when they can use them, how they can use them, and then there's also the perception of what other countries think they can do, that mystery of how many do they actually have? Are they hiding nukes somewhere? Are they working on something? Do they have a technology we don't have yet?
Yeah, I mean, So nowadays, especially, I mean, it depends on the country, but when you're talking about U.S. Russia, both sides there's a treaty that they've signed that limits the number of weapons they have deployed. So they actually know, in theory, where all the weapons are on both sides. So the ambiguity doesn't necessarily come from that, but there is an ambiguity of like, when would I consider nuclear use? And so like what we saw with the Ukraine invasion was once Putin started making these sort of not so thinly veiled threats towards nuclear use, there's a lot of people writing and talking about like, would he use a weapon? What might he get out of it? What are the scenarios? And so like that's really where the ambiguity comes in. And I think it was back, I can't remember which administration it was, but one of the US's back in the day, one of their nuclear policies, I guess, is like when they might use they adopted something called strategic ambiguity, which was like, we're not going to tell you when we would use a nuclear weapon, and hoping that because as soon as you say, you make that red line and say, I'm going to use nuclear weapons here, then sort of everything up to that level doesn't incur nuclear use. So they purposefully made it ambiguous when they might consider nuclear use as a way to try to deter people from doing stuff.
Yeah. And to go back to the report, so Reimagining Nuclear Arms Control, there are a lot of other proposals and takes out there where people talk about getting nuclear weapons down to zero, but this isn't that. This is arms control within the game that we've gotten ourselves into. Just for listeners that haven't read the report, it'll be linked in the podcast wherever you're listening or watching this, so you can go check it out. But this is, at least from my perspective, this is the best chance that we have, the best design for arms control that's non-zero. That was the goal of this report, to manipulate and not manipulate, but to change and transform the way we think about nuclear arms control, and then as a result take action within this game. But we're not saying we need to get rid of all nuclear arms.
Yeah, well, so it's we don't need, the thought of the report is that we're not necessarily going to get to no nuclear weapons tomorrow. And we're really not we're sort of on the path to getting there, but it's real slow and it's real uncertain. And there's a lot of things that we could be doing now to reduce risks that exist, but also get us back onto the path. Because I'm just going to zoom out for a second, but with nuclear weapons, there's 9 countries that have them. Back in, I think it was the 70s, there was a treaty called the Nonproliferation Treaty. There were 5 countries at the time who had nuclear weapons. It was the US, Russia, China, France, and the UK. And the treaty said, basically, everyone who signed it said, if I don't have nuclear weapons, I'm not going to try to get nuclear weapons. And I won't help anyone else try to get nuclear weapons. And then
fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, there were 5 then, there's 9 now. So clearly it didn't entirely work, but it might have slowed some stuff down. So the idea is it's to prevent nuclear weapons from spreading to different countries. And sort of in exchange for that, the countries that had nuclear weapons agreed that they would get rid of theirs. There's a part of the treaty called Article 6 that says we agree to pursue disarmament. And this was in the 70s, so there's still, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons out there. So it was never really envisioned as a quick process. But the US and Russia and UK, France, China are all legally obligated to get rid of their nuclear weapons, or at least pursue it. Things have bogged down. There's still, more than 10,000 nuclear weapons in the world. Since the new NPT, the new Non-Proliferation Treaty, got signed, 4 other countries got nuclear weapons. So, it hasn't all been hunky-dory since then. But, since basically the fall of the Soviet Union, early 90s, the US and Russia did get rid of a bunch of their weapons. They went from, I don't know how many, 10,000 or so, down to where they're at today. And that sort of that process between Russia and the US is typically what we refer to as arms control. It's the 2 of them, because they had the biggest arsenals, working together to start cutting nuclear weapons. Now we're down to the point where there's, 6,000 in storage, 1,500 deployed. So we're getting to the point where the US and Russia all of the people with nuclear weapons are, will say that they still need them, or at least they need them in this environment to protect their safety. And so there's, a bit of pushback for getting rid of nuclear weapons. So they're still obligated to do it, but it's been going very slowly. Because of that, there's been a lot of frustration with these in other countries that don't have nuclear weapons that agreed not to get them in exchange for the nuclear weapon states getting rid of theirs. And so there's a lot of frustration there. And that's kind of, I don't know if boiled over is the right term, but, that's probably a lot of what stoked. There's called a nuclear ban treaty that is like the IPNW. I can't remember the acronym. There's a treaty at the UN that's been signed by like all of the countries that are not don't have nuclear weapons or are like allies of the US that say we agree that nuclear weapons are illegal. And so that's sort of the non-nuclear weapon states trying to put pressure on the nuclear weapon states to get rid of theirs. So there's this, tension where US and Russia are obliged to get rid of their weapons. They're facing pressure from others. In exchange, they've bargained to get rid of theirs so that other countries don't get them. So they're slowly reducing their numbers, but everyone else is very frustrated that's going so slowly. And then stuff like Ukraine happens, and the US and Russia really don't want to talk to each other right now. So, and it takes a lot of work to get rid of these weapons safely, to agree to how it be done. So there's just not a lot of momentum with arms control these days. So what our report was aimed at doing was like picking a couple, I think there's like 10 or 12 proposals that pick on like very specific concerns that one side or another has, and laid out sort of, here is how you might come up with some way of, by an agreement or a treaty or whatever, some exchange, doing something cooperatively that addresses those concerns as a way to like start working those muscles again, get them cooperating again, and back in the sort of the groove of doing these arms control things. And then so it both addresses some issues today, but also starts them back towards this slow disarmament process that's kind of stalled in recent years.
Yeah, and you set up the 9 proposals talking about that cooperation or lack of cooperation between China, Russia, and the United States. And you say that the governments of China, Russia, and US all express support for arms control. They disagree profoundly, however, about its purposes and preconditions. Before we dive into some of the specific proposals, what are the main ways that US, China, and Russia are not seeing eye to eye on nuclear arms before we even like the ways in which they realize that nuclear arms control is good, but they just can't figure out how to cooperate on how to get there?
Yeah, so we'll start with US Russia. Basically, they both are aware, they've both done the arms race thing before together. And it was, hugely expensive and ramped up all this risk. So they're both aware that they don't want to be getting into an arms race. But there are sort of a bunch of like little issues that are just stopping them up from going any further. So one of the big ones is what get referred to as tactical nuclear weapons or non-strategic nuclear weapons. They're actually not so much smaller than a normal nuclear weapon in terms of like how big the explosion is, but they're usually like carried on a bomb that has to be delivered by a plane, so that they can't be delivered as far. So they're more of like a regional issue rather than like the intercontinental ballistic missile thing that typically gets lumped in as strategic weapons. So all of the sort of the agreements between US and Russia on limiting the number of weapons they have only apply to the strategic stuff. So they only apply to like ballistic missile submarines, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers. So those are like the US has the B-2, the like triangle shaped batwing plane.
Yeah.
So that thing can carry,
it looks like bomb. A UFO.
Yeah. yeah. So like those bombers are counted towards the limits under this agreement between US and Russia. That's called New START. And so that places the limit on how many they have deployed. There's a bunch of the other ones, like the non-strategic ones. Those all just live in storage. They don't need to be mounted on a missile all the time. So they're in storage, and we don't really have a good way of proving, the U.S. proving that Russia has destroyed, gotten rid of one of its nuclear weapons that's been in storage, and vice versa. Because if
could
the
you
US
use those could you use those in a timely fashion if you wanted to get a stored nuclear weapon ready to launch? Is that something you can easily do without being detected, or would we be able to see that?
Probably something that would take on the scale of like a few days. The US and Russia would probably be able to see it, the other side doing it.
Okay.
Just because, they most likely know where everyone stores their nuclear weapons, and they're unsurprisingly very secure bunkers. And so if you have to start pulling warheads out, then you're going to need to like get a bunch of like heavy lifting cranes and stuff to pull the bombs out and then get them loaded on the trucks, and you'll see the security convoys. And so a lot of that stuff can probably be picked up by overhead imaging.
Got it.
So like by satellites. So they should probably be able to see the preparations in advance. So they're still, but it's still only a couple of days, right? So they're still very much usable. But Russia has like, I can't remember, I think it's like 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons, and the US has like 200. So there's this, if we switch to, right now we've been only controlling the strategic stuff, but as soon as we start lumping in the all warheads, which is sort of kind of where you need to go next, then Russia needs to give up, 1,800 more weapons than the US does. So Russia is unsurprisingly very not on board with that plan. So the US is like very much wants to start doing something that takes into account tactical nuclear weapons. Russia really doesn't want to. Russia also always raises, there's 200 US tactical nuclear weapons based in Europe. So they're kind of, they would be delivered, I believe, by, I can't remember which countries, but NATO bombers essentially can deliver them.
Okay.
So not US, but they're US weapons.
So we have weapons throughout Europe that we can use with bombers. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why the US has those over there is to reassure NATO allies that the US has skin in the game, essentially. Like they're saying, here is our commitment to protect you, is like, we've got these weapons there.
Yeah, it's like a down payment.
Yeah, so, I mean, it goes back to that, like, how do you use nuclear weapons without actually using them? You put them places and like, as a way to like show your commitment. But so those are all in Europe, which is relatively close to Russia. So Russia always raises this, like, before we talk about anything, you need to get rid of those. You need to remove those nuclear weapons from Europe, which is very much a non-starter for the US because of this reassuring European allies thing. So there's a bit of a loggerheads there for sure. The Russians also worry about US ballistic missile defenses. So there used to be a treaty that prevented, the US and Russia signed together, that said we're not going to develop ballistic missile defenses. The US pulled out of that in like 2003, I think, back during the Bush II administration. And so Russia is concerned.
So we both agreed not to defend ballistic missiles. That seems like it seems like it would be very hard to get a country to agree to that, not having any sort of defense system.
Yes. Well, so here's the tricky thing, is that it sounds super reasonable that we should be defending ourselves against ballistic missiles. And like, we see a lot of stuff in, the Middle East, like the Israeli Iron Dome, where they're shooting down like rockets and stuff. And so like, we see that stuff working and it protects them. But it's a very different problem to like shoot down a short range, relatively unsophisticated rocket like the Israeli Iron Dome does, and to shoot down an intercontinental ballistic missile. So the warheads on the intercontinental ballistic missiles, they travel through space. So when they're kind of traveling in space and coming out of the atmosphere, or coming back into the atmosphere, they're traveling at like 8 kilometers per second, which is like 5 miles per second. And so you can imagine if something traveling that fast, it is extremely hard to hit it with anything.
Yeah.
So it's really challenging to have a ballistic missile defense work. And the way, a ballistic missile defenses that we have today work, or try to work, is that if you shoot a missile at me, I shoot a missile at your missile. So like you build up a bunch of missiles. So the thing is, the US has like, I think it's like 40-ish, it's in that neighborhood, 40 or 50 interceptors, and they're each one's a missile, and they're very complicated and they're really tricky to make work, very expensive. So the US has like 50 of those, and the Russians have like 1,500 weapons. So even, if the Russians attack, it's not a very good defense because there's just not enough interceptors.
And wouldn't there be dummy missiles too launched with the main missile? So you'd have to pick off 100 missiles from the sky and just pray that you got the right one?
Yeah, so the way the missiles actually work is the missile burns, and that gets it up into out of the atmosphere into space, and then it releases a bunch of warheads if it's carrying. It maybe only has one, but a lot of the Russian ones have like 4 warheads. So it gets into space, and then it sort of drops off these warheads as it goes, and they kind of fly off. And then when it's doing that, it's probably going to be letting go of decoys, and the decoys are just there. They're probably just like balloons because you're not in the atmosphere, so there's no like atmospheric drag, so everything travels at the same speed. So even if you're like a super heavy nuclear warhead or a big inflatable balloon, you're traveling at the same speed.
That's wild. So it's like buckshot, but with nuclear missiles, and you got to guess which one's the right one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not even that you got to guess; it's you have to program a computer to be able to figure it out without knowing what the decoys are going to look like. So you have to. That's really the big challenge with ballistic missile defenses is that you have to program a thing that without knowing what it's going to look like is going to pick the right ones, and it's just crazy. It's just nigh on impossible. It's not necessarily impossible, but it's really, really hard. So it just makes defenses not great as a actual defense. But what happens if, say, Russia's got 1,500 nuclear weapons, and the U.S. has 1,500. So the U.S. shoots its 1,000 of its weapons at the Russian ones, blows up all but 10 of them. I'm just making up numbers here, but blows all of them up but a few. Then Russia is we had this thing, Russia was our whole posture was, if you attack us, we'll attack you back. So they launch what they have left. Now there's only 10 and you've got 50 interceptors. And so that's a much more feasible thing to do. It's still extremely hard, but it's so the real concern about missile defenses is that they're not good at defense, but they're okay at supporting an offense. So that's why the Russians and the Chinese really worry about U.S. missile defenses is they don't really work very well right now, but they might in the future. And they're threatening because it opens the door that the U.S. might try to attack Russian or Chinese nuclear weapons with their own and rely on their defenses to back that up.
So it's like having I was going to say it's like having the best offensive starting 5 in the NBA with guys that don't run back on defense, essentially.
yeah. It's just all forwards. So those are very threatening. So this got realized back in the 70s. And so the US and Russia were like, okay. And also back then, they really didn't work at all. The technological hurdles were just huge. So they basically agreed not to ever build them. And then, or I guess the agreement actually let them build one each. But they didn't because they didn't really work and they were very expensive. And so the US pulled out of that during the Bush administration, W. Bush, excuse me. And then started building one. And so now the Russians and also the Chinese are see them building it. And it's not, it's really hard to, you have to test them to see if the missile defenses to see if they work. And you do that by shooting at stuff in the atmosphere. You'll send up a test target and then you'll shoot your interceptor at it. And you can't really hide that. So, the Chinese and the Russians can watch these tests happen and see if they work or not. And the track record of the US system that they currently have is 50-50. It's not great. So they know it doesn't work, but they're worried it might someday work. So that's why they don't want, they would like, to put some limit on the US's ability to build up missile defenses. So that's also that, going back to your original question, that's another thorn in the side of the arms control process is so China and Russia feel threatened.
So what do we agree on between Russia, US, and China? What would be the starting ground besides the general concept that we need more nuclear arms control? Is there something that everyone would be for, or everyone agrees that we need to stop doing, something like that?
Well, so so basically all of the arms control to date has been between the US and Russia. China had an arsenal that was a 10th the size of US and Russia's. And still, it's only 300 or so compared to depending how you want to count it, 1,500 or 5,000 that the other guys have. So China's been we're not going to do anything until you guys get your stuff together and get your numbers down. So China's just not coming to the table at all. But now the U.S., we hear this a lot in the Trump administration, is like, we don't want to keep going until we bring in China into the discussions and put limits on China. So there's just a giant loggerheads there where the Chinese are like, no, you guys sort your stuff out and then we'll come. And the U.S. is like, we need to start bringing them in now. So that's the other sort of big impediment there. As to stuff that, they do agree on, the sort of big one that still exists. There used to be more, but during the Trump administration, a bunch of them fell apart. But the one that's kind of left is called New START, and that's the U.S. and Russia limiting the number of warheads that they have on their ballistic missiles and their submarines and their bombers. There's also other stuff that sort of sides tacitly agree to. One is that there hasn't been a nuclear test since I think the 90s by the big powers. I think some of the smaller, like North Korea, obviously has tested since then. But so there's sort of there was a treaty called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty that was signed. I can't remember what year it was, but it was signed and it's observed. So the sides are following it, but the U.S. hasn't actually ratified it yet. So the U.S. hasn't fully committed, but everyone's acting like it works. So that basically just creates this norm where no one is testing their nuclear weapons, at least by actually exploding them. So that is one thing that they've agreed on.
Yeah. Is there, in regards to Trump, is there something to having a guy like him in office to deter other countries from attacking us because he's much more unhinged than your average president? That would be an understatement. Just having a guy that in all aspects, very emotional, doesn't think a lot of things through before he says them or posts them, which is what people either love or hate about him. But in terms of nuclear deterrence, is he good for that? Is he bad for that? What do you think?
So back in, I think it was the Nixon administration, there was something called the madman theory, where Nixon was just like, I'm going to be crazy, and then the Soviets will know what to expect, and they'll have to back off. Basically, that whole idea is I'm going to be completely unpredictable and run these huge risks of miscalculation in the hope that it stops them from doing something that they would have otherwise done. So you're maybe getting a bit of caution, extra caution maybe, in your adversaries. But to do that, you're just creating these real actual risks of nuclear weapons ever getting used. Because if you start acting crazy and unhinged, the other side might be like, well, this guy may be crazy. We need to get ready in case they do attack us.
Yeah.
And then if say we see the Russians starting to get ready with our spy satellites, we're like, whoa, they're getting ready for a nuclear war. We need to get ready for a nuclear war. And then they'll see us getting ready for a nuclear war in response. And they're like, oh, they are going to be attacking us. We need to. So it creates these pressures that snowball and really create risks of nuclear war actually happening.
That's it's like if you're afraid your girlfriend's going to cheat on you, so you act crazy and go out and get fucked up and you're doing all this wild shit, and then she does cheat on you and you're like, oh shit, I actually pushed her to do it because I was trying to act crazy, and that flew things off the rails.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, as soon as you start behaving unpredictably, then people are going to treat you that way, and that's runs a lot of risks. So, there's maybe an idea there, but I would say it probably doesn't, the juice isn't worth the squeeze on that.
Yeah. In regards to China, you write in the report, Russia and the United States have a dedicated channel for exchanging arms control notifications. China and the US, and possibly China and Russia, would have to create one. In doing so, Beijing would be tacitly acknowledging the potential value of transparency, a step that it has not yet taken. How do you get a country like China, who has not had a track record of transparency, even with things like COVID data? It's very hard to know what's coming out of China, what's going in, whether the numbers are correct. If they can't be transparent with something that's not as volatile as nuclear arms, and COVID is pretty fucking volatile, how could you expect China to be transparent about building up nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I mean, so that really is like the big question of the day is just how do you get China to the table? Because a lot of China, again, like early on, they were just like, you guys have too many weapons compared to ours, so we're not gonna do anything until you guys make some headway. There's other issues, like the stuff we talk about in the report are not necessarily talking about numbers of warheads. It's about other things like, like anti-satellite weapons or like warning each other in advance when you're going to test fire a missile, stuff like that. So those are like smaller things that have benefits, but China in general is just like anything that requires transparency, they're just immediately less interested in because it doesn't fit with how they interact with the world. And like, especially when it comes to their nuclear weapons, or like they've always kept a very small arsenal and they've hoped that it remains secure and safe, like they can't be disarmed, in part by keeping secrecy around it. So yeah, it's a huge challenge of trying to figure out how to get China to engage. Once they do engage, which hopefully they will, anytime you set up one of these sort of arms control kind of agreements, there's always something called verification. And that's actually most of what I work on from a day-to-day perspective. So verification is just like you and I, let's say we agree to only keep 2 nuclear weapons each or whatever, whatever it is.
Just a handful of nukes.
Just a handful. Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to go crazy and get like 5.
Yeah. Just a sprinkle.
So, if I'm going to keep 2, I don't want you to have 4 because then you've got, more than me and that's not good. So before I agree to that, arrangement, I'm going to want a way to make sure that you only have 2 and vice versa. You're going to want the same thing from me, right? We're going to agree to it, but then we're going to want to find a way to make sure the other side is living up to their obligations. And that's verification is what we call that. Typically it's done using satellites or inspections. So it's like stuff you can see from overhead or actually sending teams over to like military bases to go poke around and look at stuff. So the reason why right now, like US and Russia have the limits are on the number of deployed weapons they have. So those are the weapons that are on missiles and not the ones in storage. Is because we don't actually count the warheads. We count the missiles because we can see the missiles and we can see the silos with satellites. And you can like send a team to go look at a missile in a silo and make sure, they've only got 4 warheads on that missile or whatever. And they like literally like one of the ways they do it is like they put like a bed. I mean, it's probably probably something fancier than a bed sheet, but just like a piece of cloth and like backlight it. And then they take the top off the missile and they can see like the like puppet show, projection onto the cloth. Like they're doing like a shadow play. And then
they'll literally order a sheet off Amazon to try to hide a nuclear missile.
Yeah. So, the way we've been doing verification is like looking at these big things. And if you want to start getting to the like putting limits on nuclear weapons or bringing China into the fold, who don't store any of their warheads on their weapons, they keep them all in central storage. We need to figure out how to actually do the verification when like missile or like warheads are in storage. Like that's a problem we haven't figured out yet, how to actually do that. So that's like a lot of what we're working on the report is like trying to figure out, okay, how do you set up how do you arrange things so that we can make sure the other side is holding up their end? And usually it's through like satellites or people walking around with a clipboard looking at stuff.
That part of the report to me was super interesting when you're talking about ways to get around transparency and how to verify nuclear weapons without actually being able to see them or have clear imagery of it. And I believe one of the things that you mentioned was tracking fissile materials or fissile materials. Hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, fissile.
Yeah, and that if a country was making fissile materials, it would need to do certain operatory things that would spark movement on satellites, or maybe they'd have to get things from other countries. And so by that mechanism, you would know, you might have a good idea of whether a country was ramping up their nuclear weapon production or not by tracking these tangential things, not the nukes itself, but the things that are required to build them. And also, if you tracked a country's orders from Bed Bath & Beyond and they ordered, 500 giant sheets in 1 month, maybe that's another way to do it.
Well, I mean, if they're buying the sheets, then they're interested in arms control. So maybe that's a sign that they're gonna sign.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So the FBI is gonna dive into Bed Bath & Beyond's inventory. Just look at who's ordering the biggest sheets.
So fissile material is like it's like uranium, plutonium, like specific kinds of them, but it's probably too in the weeds. So all of the sort of nuclear weapons, modern nuclear weapons these days, are done with plutonium, and you make that in nuclear reactors. And so the way you like run a nuclear reactor for a power plant is going to be a bit different from the way you run what's called a breeder reactor. So a reactor that makes plutonium for bombs, because you need to like burn it at a different rate, essentially. So there's a few. So that proposal was looking at China specifically. So we have a estimate of how much plutonium China has kicking around, just from like the histories of their plants and stuff. And so if you know how much plutonium they might have on hand, then you can kind of figure out how many more nuclear bombs they might be able to make. And that matters for China in particular, because they have 200 or 300 weapons, but they only have enough fissile material, enough plutonium around to get up to like, I think it's like 700 or 800 weapons total. So like, even if China wanted to, even if they turned all the plutonium into bombs, they still would have fewer weapons than US and Russia have. And right now, so China started building a bunch of nuclear silos last year, I think, that got spotted on satellites. And so the US has really worried that China is trying to like build up enough weapons to be like a peer competitor with the US and Russia. So that's been a big concern. So, but what our report was about was that, by tracking the fissile material, then you can be sure they'll never get above a certain amount. And
what happens in a situation like China, where they're building up silos, trying to be secretive about it, and then you find out that they're building nuclear silos? Do you send them a message and say, "Hey, we see you guys," and then they're like, you got us"? Like, what happens there?
Yeah. So basically. So we found out about like the nuclear silos. So China built like 200 or 300, like a bunch of silos out in the desert. And we found out about that because of a dude who's like an undergrad. His name's Decker Eveleth. He's on Twitter. You can follow him. Right. He was like looking through like Google Earth images, something like to that effect, and he saw them building these out in the desert. And then they found this missile field. And then later, a couple people from the Federation of American Scientists found 2 more fields of these silos that are just getting built. So these were all actually discovered by the public. So basically everyone found out about it on Twitter.
Was he actively looking for nuclear silos? Did he say on Twitter, or was it just he was working on something else, and as a result of that, saw this stuff start to pop up?
So he's part of a kind of group of researchers who, so I don't know exactly because I haven't spoken to him about it, but he's part of a group of researchers who do what's called open source intelligence. So they're usually looking at like the North Korean missile tests and stuff, and trying to like figure out what they can find out from like the propaganda photos of like, I don't know if you saw, there was a video that got released of like Kim Jong-un. Walking out, like checking his watch and stuff. Yeah, so like stuff like that, and then they'll like go into the photos and like look in the background and see like, oh, there's some sort of tower in the background, and then they'll find the tower, and then they can figure out where the video was taken and stuff like that. So they kind of, that group of people work on that stuff for a living. So that all got found out in the public, and then I don't know if China has made official statements. I would guess not. Mm-hmm. I would bet money that the U.S. government knew about that before it happened. Like I would bet good money that the U.S. intelligence satellites, like spy satellites, saw all that happening well before. But the problem is, if the U.S. starts saying like, "Hey, we saw this on our satellites," or like, if the U.S. just goes, "Hey, China's building stuff," China's gonna be like, "No, we're not." And so the U.S. has to show proof. And if they show the proof, then they're sort of playing their hand and they're giving away what their capabilities are. So the U.S. intelligence community is very concerned about leaking their capabilities. Like they don't want people to know what they can see. So during the Trump administration, Trump showed like a photo of an Iranian missile test launch pad. And you could like read the writing that was like the writing around the launch pad.
Did he tweet it out or something? He showed a picture?
I think he just showed the photo of it. Like it was probably in his like classified briefing, and then I think he just like showed it to someone. I can't remember exactly how it was kind of, it was
yeah,
a
he's
little
like,
silly.
hey guys, you want to see this? Top secret.
Yeah, and then like people were like saw the photos and they're like, oh, so now we can figure out what the resolution of the US keyhole satellites is, because we have this photo from the satellite and we can see the writing, so we can figure out how finely it is. And so like the public basically was able to figure out how good certain US imaging satellites are because that happened. So the US
and
in general,
of course other countries can see that too, so they can figure out what level to build stuff at. So once you get past a certain point, the resolution can't pick it up or it looks super pixelated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like it lets you know sort of what the other side is doing so that you can try to work around it. So that's kind of why the US wouldn't want to confront China directly about that. But since it came through the public, then it's already out there and it's sort of in the discussion. So yeah, countries are very hesitant to like accuse each other of doing these kind of things, because to show the proof, it reveals their methods. And this happens all the time.
So you mentioned the Kim Jong-un missile launch, what's been dubbed the monster missile. And for those of you who haven't seen the video, you can just search Kim Jong-un missile. I saw it on Reddit. There will be a ton of links that come up. And there was this very Top Gun TikTok-ish video where the first thing I thought when I saw this video was, holy shit, that's a really big missile. And then the second thing I thought is, does Kim Jong-un have a social media guy now? Like he literally has a guy following him to put up Instagram reels to say what he's doing, because it was it was not edited well, but it was cheesy, and it did make me laugh, where I was like, oh shit, like this is he's checking his watch, like what time is it? And then the missile launches and you're like, oh, it's that time, it's launch time, and analysts were scouring the video. I've seen some analysts say that there was a lot of fake things and doctored things in the video, and that actually the missile they fired was a missile from 2017, the one that North Korea fired. What did you think about the monster missile spectacle from Kim Jong-un, and what were your initial thoughts on it?
My initial knee jerk was like, this can't be real, right? Like this is so just kind of off the wall.
One of the top comments was, this must be an outtake from the movie The Interview.
Yeah, it was a little nuts. That said, the North Korean dictatorship does sort of have a flair for the theatric. I think Kim Jong-un's dad, Kim Jong-il, like kidnapped a director at one point and like made him direct. Like he was a big cinephile, and so he like sent his people to like kidnap like a Japanese director and like held him hostage and made him direct movies and stuff. So like, there's this like through line through that family where they're into these kind of like movies and stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense. As to like the point of it, it's not just like for fun. It's they're basically trying to say like, hey, I still have the capability to start a nuclear war, or either to defend myself, or usually when stuff starts going bad in North Korea, then they'll start making a lot of noise and they'll like start attacking South Korean islands and stuff to try to like ramp up a crisis so that they can agree to step back from it in exchange for like food aid and stuff like that. So this is sort of a thing that the North Koreans do all the time, is they're trying to basically create a crisis so that they can take advantage of it. So one of the things that they do when they like release these missile launch videos is they're just trying to like make it very clear to the outside world that they have the ability to fire a nuke at Washington or LA or wherever their missile can get. So it's very performative, but it serves a purpose. With this particular one, I'll say up front, I'm not 100% haven't been tracking the analysis so far, but I've heard a bit of it. But yeah, so there's like some inconsistencies between when the missile's on the launch pad and when you see the footage of the missile like going up into space, essentially. And so from those inconsistencies, people have been speculating that the missile probably failed early. So like the missile went to launch and something went wrong and it exploded, but they had the footage of it like taking off. And then they're like, well, we can't just show it taking off. We have to show it going into space. So then they edited in a different missile that they had footage of getting off into space. And they've done that before with, I think, their sub-launch ballistic missile tests before, where like they had a failure early, but they don't want to appear like they're having failures. They want to appear like they're competent, like they have this capability and that it's very reliable. So they kind of have an incentive to edit these things together to make them look scarier than they are. Not to say that they aren't scary, but like, that's why they do this kind of performative thing.
Yeah, I was watching it and I was blown away, no pun intended, by just the effort of the spectacle, because you would think that launching a nuclear weapon on its own or testing out a missile would be enough to send a message. But we're in the year 2022. So when I release a podcast, I don't just put out the audio and video, the full 3 hours, or do a write-up after. I'm thinking about chopping up different reels and Facebook videos, quotes, things like that for social media. So I was just kind of entertained a little bit by the fact that there's this effort on the part of North Korea to not just make their capabilities known to the rest of the world, but we're going to do it on this stage that's going to be digestible in the form of short videos, and people are going to watch it. And it's not just we want people to know, but we want this to be engaging content as well. And I guess that's the era we're in now, that even nuclear scientists and dictators and global leaders are thinking about, how do we make this engaging content?
Yeah, and and again, it's like there's a purpose to it all, is that the North Koreans don't just want their capabilities to be known by U.S. intelligence services, because U.S. intelligence services are very famously tight-lipped. They don't talk about it a lot. They want to convince the public, and the publics in China, South Korea, the U.S. They really want to like influence the discussion to like make it clear that they have nuclear weapons, and they don't want people to forget that. And they want that to be part of the discussion always, because it makes them seem bigger, essentially. So, you know, that's why they try to do this kind of slick video production. It's just maybe a slight, you know, culture thing of why it looks like a cheesy Top Gun thing from the 80s rather than you know, what we might expect today. So that's what kind of makes it funny. When really it's like, it's kind of terrifying. It's like, yeah, they have this giant missile that can carry their weapon real far.
Is there a gut feeling or some insight you have about this video that you haven't seen shared publicly yet, or just something that sticks out that you think more people should pay attention to?
No, I don't have any, you know, super deep insights on it. It's just, it's just kind of entertaining. But at the same time, it's like, don't forget that they have nuclear weapons, and you know, that they value them very highly. And you know, that's not something in the video, but it sort of speaks to the purpose of the video, is that they see their nuclear weapons as like what guarantees that they live and that they stay in power. And so like, that's why they're trying to tell people about it, is that they're like, hey, these matter to us, which makes things difficult in a world where you're trying to get rid of nuclear weapons, because, you know, it's very clear that some countries value them. Well, the countries that have them all value them.
So how important is science communication and making media style videos, not just from Kim Jong-un and North Korea's perspective, but just in general, for getting people to adopt your scientific view or policy viewpoint? When you have a report like Reimagining Nuclear Arms Control, some people will read it. People that are highly interested will go through the whole thing. Maybe they're recording a podcast about it, but there will be a large amount of people, probably a majority of people, that will only pay attention to things like that if it's in an engaging YouTube video, or it's a vertical video on Instagram Reels, or something that's quick and gives you the main bullet points to digest. And if you're trying to push initiatives, it's always easier to have the public on your side. And so I wanted to ask you, how much do you think about that when you're making the report? Not just the report itself, but what you need to do from a science communication standpoint, or maybe trying some new things, like getting on Instagram, or making these 2-minute cuts on YouTube, something like that, just to get people hooked on it from an engagement perspective.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty huge part of sort of what we do at Carnegie. So like, you can be like an academic researcher, and that's sort of like when I was doing my PhD. That's, you sit in a room by yourself and you work on stuff, and you figure it out, you write a scientific paper, and that's all great. Mm-hmm. And then a couple scientists read your paper, and then hopefully you impact that discussion, but it doesn't usually get to the broader audience. At Carnegie, we're a think tank, so like what our purpose is to come up with these ideas like the ones we have in the report, and then we try to make them happen. And we don't have the power to make them happen ourselves, so we need to convince people that it's a good idea, it's a good thing to do. So with the report, now that it's out, we spend a lot of time meeting with government officials in the US, internationally, and just kind of pitch them on the ideas. Essentially say, here's some ideas, here are the, what they might be good for, and here's how you would do it. Is sort of the key thing in our report that makes it different from some others, is that we spend a lot of time figuring out how you actually do it. But then, so like, we engage with what we call the policymakers. We engage with them a lot. But then, like there's definitely value in getting sort of the broader public interested, because these things are interesting. Like, that's why I studied nuclear weapons, is because they're super interesting. They're very horrifying, but they're very interesting. But at the same time, like, they're interesting, but they're really like arcane and complicated, and like the sort of way we treat them is very unintuitive sometimes. So, it takes some effort to get out there and tell people why ballistic missile defenses are bad, or like, that thing, like, because that doesn't make sense to first blush, but once you get into it, people generally pick up on that. So we do, I think for a couple of the reports, the space ones, we put together a little animation. We highlight that on Twitter. The comms department at Carnegie is like pushing us to, use the Twitter spaces and stuff like that, and get out there and talk to people. Because, the more people are aware of nuclear issues, I think the better, because generally people don't like nuclear risks. And that's sort of our goal, is to try to reduce the risk of nuclear weapons going off.
Yeah, I saw a couple of those videos, and I appreciate the animations, because it was very engaging. And there's a lot of people that, when you talk about things like nuclear arms race or climate change, things that will destroy the world, there's a lot of people that believe that it's the public's job to make themselves interested. And by us calling the public a bad person or a piece of shit, like, you should care about the world, because if you don't, you're a piece of shit, and the world's gonna burn, and nothing's gonna be left. And we're making it your duty to make yourself interested in this topic. And then there's the other side of it, where it's on the person's responsibility who's creating this data and creating the information to make it engaging, to hook people into the data and not just share it. And that's what you guys are doing with the animated videos. And as things like short form video and podcasts continue to progress, it seems like this is also going to be a huge renovation for science communication, because when you have creators that are competing with the same level of creativity as the top YouTubers, then you're going to slowly slide in very useful and impactful information into the minds of teenagers and young adults that feels like fun content. It feels like, oh, this is super interesting. And you just taught them about nuclear arms in 60 seconds, just a general video. So it's just exciting to see more and more people in the scientific community competing with the same level of virality and the same level of interest as some of the most engaging content out there.
Yeah, like it's super fun to do. Like I really enjoy talking to people about science stuff because it's, you know, I spend all this time going to school, you know, being really boring, and it's like I kind of want to talk to people about these things I find interesting. So like that's, you know, that's why I'm here. I really enjoy it. So yeah, we you know, it's kind of on us to, especially, you know, at a think tank where we're trying to change policy. It's like, it's on us to get out there and convince people that, you know, they should care about these things. And it's can be hard sometimes because, you know, especially like nuclear weapon, like the things you mentioned, nuclear weapons, climate change, they're all stuff that it's like very consequential. It's like stuff that can end the world. But because of that, it's like very exhausting. Like it's like, do I really want to read this article and be depressed? So like but you gotta push through that because, you know, these things do matter. So if we don't, that's sort of one of the things I learned when I started studying like nuclear history and stuff like that. As you know, I didn't do my Ph.D. in nuclear history, but it's like you have to learn a bit. What I kind of figured out is that if we don't do anything, if we're not proactively trying to change the policies, they're not going to change, and we're going to be stuck with the nuclear weapons until we get rid. You know, we'll be stuck with them forever. And the longer we have them, the more, you know, every day that goes by that we still have nuclear weapons, there's a chance one will go off at some point. And like the Russian invasion of Ukraine really kind of jammed that home for me. It's like, you know, like you said, our report is kind of like a slow and steady approach, like trying to like chip away at these little things, take it slow because, you know, we're not going to get rid of nuclear weapons tomorrow. But with the invasion of Ukraine, I was checking how far my house was from the Pentagon because I live in Virginia. And I was like, I'm trying to, and then like plugging that into Nuke Map and like seeing if I'm going to be in the blast radius if someone tries to nuke the Pentagon and stuff like that. So it's like, it really just reminded me that like, even though, you know, I think the slow and steady approach has merits, if you go too slowly, you know, there's always a risk that nuclear war is going to break out, just in the status quo. Like that never went away. We maybe don't think about it as much anymore, but it's still there. And so this was a big reminder for me that like those risks still exist.
I was in the same boat. I mentioned offline to you that I spoke to Brian Toon a few weeks ago at University of Colorado, and when the Russia-Ukraine invasion happened, that sparked a huge interest and concern for me as with billions of other people. And one of the first things I did was go to that nuclear map, put the dot over if a nuke dropped in Midtown Manhattan, and then see how far I'm away in Brooklyn, and seeing, you know, would I die from the initial blast? Would a building probably collapse on me? Am I going to get radiation beyond repair? And these type of risks, like you said, they're always present. The threat of a nuclear attack, and then you have these events like the tragic invasion of Ukraine, and that brings the background event into the forefront of your mind. And yeah, it's I guess that's what it is from a content perspective. The whole game of content is to make people care and make people spend 30 seconds of their day watching something, and maybe 20 minutes the next day reading a little bit more about it, and then you slowly get someone interested in it over time. But then the Russia-Ukraine invasion has so much shock value that there's not really time to slowly get accustomed to nuclear war, and it forces a lot of people into, I'm going to go on a 4-hour Reddit hole deep dive into what's going to happen, where the nuclear facilities are by me, and all this stuff. So it kind of shakes people awake a little bit.
Yeah, and it's nice that it brings it into everyone's mind. I think the trick is going to be making sure people don't go back, like once the Ukraine war draws to whatever conclusion it comes to, kind of really hope people don't go back to thinking it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't need to worry about nukes anymore, because they're still around, and like these crises just kind of come out of nowhere sometimes. So that's sort of the value of arms control, is that you put these guardrails on when things are like peaceful and things are chill. You put these agreements in place that kind of restrict what can happen in a crisis. Like you maybe get rid of some weapons, or you put these launch notifications systems in place. Then when a crisis does come around, it's like there are less ways for things to go bad. So yeah, so like this whole thing really kind of shook me a bit, but also at the same time, really kind of validated my like decision to do what I do, I guess.
Yeah, and you released the report in December of 2021, correct? A few months before the invasion.
Yeah.
Obviously, the invasion is a global shakeup from a physical and emotional perspective and an intelligence perspective in terms of how much data you have, and that is a huge data point that I suspect would completely change the way that you look at things, or maybe shift a little bit from a policy perspective. Is there anything that you would change about the report that got put out in December since the Russia-Ukraine invasion? Like, if you were going to release the report 2 weeks from now, how would the report be different, or would it mostly be the same?
I think the ideas, like the proposals, would be the same. It would be much more pessimistic. So basically, like James and I are heading to Europe in May to go talk to some folks over there. Mm-hmm. And rather than like pitching it as like, here are a bunch of ideas for arms control that, we want to get your feedback, our pitch is like, so everything is terrible right now. How do we get out of that? And does arms control play a role in that? So like, it's really shifted the way we've been thinking about it, just because the US and Russia, understandably, are not getting along right now. Like, they're not talking, they're not, avenues of communication that are needed to, figure these things out and negotiate them just aren't open. So it really like, it's going to make making any progress on arms control more difficult. At the same time, it also, like, as we were saying, like, reminds us that there's these big nuclear risks. So, it underscores the value of arms control, but it's also going to make it a lot harder to make new agreements or make agreements work. And so, like, for example, there's the agreement, New START, that the US and Russia have that limits the number of weapons they have. That expires in like 5 years. And so they're going to need to start working on a replacement for it if they're going to have one, like nowish. And that's not really happening. So, there's definitely a bit of pessimism. And then, as I mentioned at the top of the show, there's also this other group of people in the Nuclear Ban Treaty organization who are like promoting, nuclear weapons should be illegal, essentially, that idea. And they're going to be looking at Ukraine and being like, see, like, these things are really risky. And like, the countries like Russia, which is ostensibly one of the like responsible nuclear powers, is getting itself with this war of, choice into the situation where there's like people making nuclear threats at each other. It's like that. None of that needed to happen. But if we've got nuclear weapons around, it's going to happen. So the ban treaty people are going to be saying, look, see, like, nuclear weapons should be banned. They're super dangerous. And then the folks who rely on like the North Koreans and even like European governments in the US are going to be like, well, nuclear weapons are the only thing that's preventing this from going into a full-scale war. And the Russians are going to be like, nuclear weapons are the only thing that are allowing us to do this without the US intervening. Like, because if there were no nuclear weapons, the US might intervene on Ukraine's behalf. But because Russia has nuclear weapons, the US has very clearly said, like, we're not going to be shooting at Russians. We're not going to get ourselves into that situation. So at the Ukraine thing has simultaneously showed the risks of nuclear weapons, but also showed the value of nuclear weapons to the people who have them. So everyone's going to be talking past each other. Like, no one's pulling the same message out. They're only like reinforcing their own beliefs, which is going to make, it's super tricky to really come to any sort of agreement. So, so like the proposals we have, I think they're all still valid in terms of content. And I think, the way we approached it, we were like, we're going to pick some small, easy in quotation marks, to do things that can be like an on-ramp to more cooperation. So, in an ideal world, something similar to one of our proposals might be a part of like a peace agreement or something following on to help address, the security environment in Europe post-Ukraine. So like address, say, some of Russia's concerns about US ballistic missile defense sites that are in Europe. So we had a proposal on that of like ways Russians could inspect those to make sure they can't be launched or loaded with offensive cruise missiles, which is a worry that they have. So like something like that might have a place in like whatever peace agreement comes out of Ukraine. That like a proposal like that might be useful in helping calm some of Russia's concerns. It would have to be packaged with something else that addresses U.S. concerns, because the U.S. doesn't just give up. I mean, no country just like gives away stuff. There's always some reciprocity. So like there's maybe like a glimmer of hope in the arms control sense of like what it might be useful for, or what positive role it might have. But at the same time, it's like the overall political environment is just very pessimistic right now. So hopefully that changes before New START, the numerical limits between Russia and the U.S. Hopefully, doesn't expire.
Yeah, is the pessimism more surface level pessimism in terms of this conflict massively screwing over Ukraine in the sense that there's no way they're coming back from this, or is it a deep foundational pessimism where you legitimately think that the chances of getting in a global nuclear war are much higher than they were 3 months ago? So basically the chances have skyrocketed.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say skyrocketed. They're definitely higher. Like the chances have increased for sure because there's this crisis going on. I would say that the chances of a global nuclear war happening are still quite low. Like they've increased. It's, more of a concern, but I don't think it's like, I'm not stockpiling food. Right.
Could you put a number on it, or would it not make sense to do that?
No, you're just, anyone who puts like a percentage number on like percentage, like chance of nuclear war, is just making up a number.
Yeah.
You can't quantify that in any meaningful sense. And I think it's even hard to like guess what the chance of nuclear war is. But what you can figure out is like, is the chance increasing or decreasing? Like, do we see more pressures towards nuclear weapon, like nuclear war occurring? Or do we see the opposite where like people are doing arms control agreements to try to reduce the risk? And we don't see that right now. What we see is this ratcheting up of tensions. And the ratcheting up of tensions makes doing the arms control stuff that reduces risks more difficult. So it's kind of a bad all around on that front.
So when you go over to Europe in May, are there going to be talks of legitimately sitting down with Putin and having discussions with world leaders? Would it be more of talks about letting things cool off because they're too volatile right now, and then proposing a plan for later? What are going to be the main things that you're discussing and trying to get done when you go over to Europe?
Yeah, so we're smaller fish than that. So I don't think we're talking to any world leaders. We're talking to some government folks in Europe, trying to like figure out what their thinking is, like how they see this, what security is going to look like in the future in Europe, and then taking that, like we're trying to learn that from them while also pitching our ideas from the report of like things that might be useful to make sure they're aware of the ideas if they're ever in a spot where they can make something happen. Yeah, so one of the things with Ukraine and the European countries is now that it's very clear that Russia is willing to try these kind of crazy invasions. The NATO countries are going to be a lot more wary of Russia, so they're not going to NATO. So like German government, for example, is probably not going to be very anti-nuclear weapon in the near future because they rely on U.S. nuclear weapons as as an umbrella, as a shield to protect them against Russian invasion. So we're also trying to just gauge that level of sort of how are the Europeans thinking about nuclear weapons now in terms of their defense from Russia. Because if, they get into the spot where they're like, no, nuclear weapons are absolutely imperative to keeping us safe from Russia, that's just a lot less pressure, that basically it's just like fewer people pushing for the U.S. and the nuclear weapon states to keep disarming. So, we're our purpose is basically to sort of take the temperature over there amongst a couple government folks and some non-government folks. But we're not over there like making deals or anything. That's all high up government folks who do that.
Yeah, no, it's the temperature is definitely heating up, and it makes it even more scary that there's such a big lack of communication from between global leaders. And when something like this happens, it's almost like the cords get cut between all these countries that are nuclear, or at least between Russia and everyone else, because of all the sanctions, and no one knows who Putin is talking to. I'm sure he's talking to some people outside of Russia, but the actual acts that Putin is committing are scary on their own. And then when you don't have any communication, when you cut off ties from talking to people and reasoning with people and just getting on the phone and being like, hey, what do you want? What are you doing? It's the number one rule of any relationship, which I'm sure still applies on the global level, is that whatever you're going through, communicate it, find the words to say what you're feeling or what you're thinking. And even if it's something the other side doesn't like to hear, at least you're forming some sort of connection from being vulnerable. So now I'm just thinking about Putin on BetterHelp doing like a Zoom therapy meeting with all the world leaders in one big chat and talking about how they feel. But it does make it much more scary, and it's such an easy problem to solve, to just get people on the phone and say, this is why I'm doing this. Maybe you're not going to give in to what I want, but at least I want you to know how I'm feeling. Which is,
So Russia's brought home a bunch of its diplomats from a bunch of different countries, I think in response to the sanctions. So there's, definitely a lot less at that kind of lower level. I think Putin's still talking to, I think he had a meeting with Emmanuel Macron at one point. So there's still some communication going on. And then there's, I think it's still in place there. At least during the Cold War, there was a red telephone is the nuclear hotline. I don't think it's actually red, but there's a direct link from the Kremlin to the White House, essentially, where if a nuclear, as basically a phone they can pick up if the U.S. sees Russian nuclear missiles coming in, be like, what the hell is happening? Because just the reason why that's a concern is that during the Cold War at NORAD, so NORAD is the U.S. kind of monitors airspace and stuff around the US and outer space. And so they're the ones who would detect a nuclear attack if it were coming in. And so they do trainings sporadically to make sure people know what a nuclear attack would look like. And so during the Cold War, someone put the training tape in. So there's a tape that had to make the board look like a nuclear attack was happening. And then they did the training and it was cool. And then they left the tape in and they never took it out. And then it played later after a shift change. Oh, and Jesus. So there's people who are like, holy crap, there's a nuclear attack coming in. And I think this was the Carter administration. And then luckily there's fail safe kind of there's other ways that they verify that these things are true. So they went and looked at the satellite feeds and the satellites weren't picking it up. And so it was fine. But there's this point where I think he's the national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, back then, got a call in the middle of the night. He was sleeping, got woken up being like, hey, there's a nuclear attack potentially coming in. Should we get a hold of the president, kind of thing? So that kind of stuff happens. So, so the ability to pick up a phone and call your opposing counterpart is valuable for deconflicting that kind of stuff. So luckily there is some, at least today, there's some amount of talking with Putin and other world leaders, sort of at a much lower and slower scale. People like us who are non-government, we spend a lot of our time talking to government folks about our ideas and stuff like that. And also when we go pitch our ideas, we hear what their concerns are. And so we might go talk to some Russians, and hear what their concerns are. And then we'll go talk to the US folks, and then we can kind of relay back and forth these concerns between them without them actually talking to each other, because they might not be able to because of political constraints. So, there's always information kind of flowing around. And then we also talk to our Russian counterparts who are non-government over there, sporadically. So there is, some communication going on. And back during the Cold War, actually, that's sort of one of the big drivers for getting the nuclear reductions and arms control to work in the Cold War was Russian non-government scientists, or non-government officials, scientists in Russia and scientists in the US talking to each other and being like, hey, they understood that nuclear war was bad. And so they worked together and put pressure kind of from inside their own governments to make these like disarmament kind of stuff happen. So, there's precedent for that kind of stuff being helpful.
Yeah. And going back to the red phone and the whole mistake with the video, it made me think about my Reddit rabbit hole education on nuclear weapons these past few weeks. And one of the harrowing details that I discovered is that these near accident nuclear launches have happened 9+ times or something like that. It was either 9 or 13, but there were so many. It's more than one. That's the important thing, that the world almost ended because of an accident or a glitch, or someone mistaked sunlight for a nuke on radar. And hair triggers is a thing that comes up a lot when people talk about nuclear weapons, which from my understanding is essentially having nuclear weapons ready to go in a very short period of time. So you could launch a nuke in 5-10 minutes, something like that. And it only seems like hair triggers are amplifying the risk that you have an accidental nuclear launch, and that in order to have a negotiation about nuclear arms, there should be one day, like just a global turn off your hair trigger day and talk about nukes and just share your thoughts. And we all agree, whatever happens within these 24 hours, we're not going to launch any type of weapons at any other country. Just flick that switch off, because it's like, how can you have a discussion about anything when you're on the brink of exploding? Like like just one snap and you can destroy an entire country. Is there something to be said about how easy it is to accidentally launch a nuclear weapon? And what is your whole take on the hair trigger situation?
Yeah. So there's actually a really great book by Eric Schlosser called Command and Control. It outlines like a bunch of nuclear near misses that happened in the U.S., especially kind of early in the Cold War. So there was in Damascus, I can't remember, not Middle East Damascus, but there's a Damascus in the U.S. Can't remember what state it's in, but they had a bunch of the U.S. nuclear missile silos are sort of just in the middle of the country, out in the kind of middle of nowhere, and I think they were refueling the missile. So you keep fuel in the missile so that when it's ready to launch, because it needs to be on this hair trigger, that there's fuel in it, so it's ready to go. But the fuel is like super toxic and really hard to deal with. Anyway, so a guy dropped yeah. But okay, they've moved away from that kind of fuel now. This is like liquid fuel. They use solid stuff now. But a dude dropped a wrench and it fell. And you can imagine these nuclear silos are quite deep because these missiles are big. And it fell and it bounced off the side of the silo wall and bounced into the missile and punched a hole in the missile's fuel tank. And it started leaking fuel. And then eventually, after a while, the fuel ignited and detonated. And there was a set of nuclear warheads on top of the missile. And when the missile exploded in its silo, it like shot it out of the top of the silo and it like landed nearby. And so it was like, that was, I think, one of the closer ones. I can't remember what year it was, but at one point the US used to fly its bombers around with nuclear weapons loaded on it, on the planes. And that like a B-52 had a crash, I think, or like a problem over North Carolina, and they accidentally dropped one of their nuclear weapons on like someone's front yard in Greensboro, North Carolina. Like just like a lot of the crazy stuff like that. And then there's like the training tape stuff, and then there's also like the crises, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, and then there was another one called people refer to it as Able Archer. So there was like a NATO conventional military exercise that the Russians saw, and because they weren't communicating very well, were like, this looks like the preparation for attack. And so like there was a big ratchet up of their worry about being attacked. So that's sort of why I'm personally of the opinion that if we keep nuclear weapons around forever, eventually some, or at least one or more, are going to go off, which is why I'm like, because of my work, I'm very aware of the risks in a lot of my thinking. Like a lot of like the work I do is trying to figure out how to make these agreements work. And it's all super hard, and it's like there's no easy answer. So I'm very aware of the risks inherent with like getting rid of nuclear weapons and like the challenges of doing it. But at the same time, I think as long as we have them around, there's always a risk that some are going to go off. And so that's why my beliefs are like, I think we should get rid of nuclear weapons as a goal, but I'm also aware it's super hard to get there. Okay.
If you're that it's super insightful. Just hearing that a nuke could be accidentally dropped in someone's backyard barbecue definitely makes me feel better about the state of the nuclear arms race. Knowing what you know about how risky the state of nuclear weapons are right now, how do you sleep at night? Legitimately, like, because I'm looking at all this stuff and I'm not doing it every day. I've looked into things for a few weeks for 2 podcasts, and even I'll catch myself just slipping into this spiral of, Jesus, is an accident going to happen tomorrow? Is someone going to press the button?
Yeah, really, you gotta you just can't think about it all the time. It's like I can think about it during working hours, and then after that I need to just like chill out and not. Yeah, I was actually thinking about this earlier today. I was like, I realized I'd never watched more than the first episode of Breaking Bad. And it's like, I've heard it's a great show. I watched the first episode, and then I realized this show is so like tense and stressful. It's like, I can't have this in my time, like my spare time, because I get that at work thinking about nuclear weapons all the time. So when I'm like off work, I need to be watching stupid, happy, mindless stuff, because I can't deal with these like stuff like Breaking Bad, which is really good, but like I just can't take that stress.
If my job was researching and dictating and trying to come up with nuclear policy on a daily basis, I would need to be on a steady stream of morphine in order to watch a show like Breaking Bad to not feel tense, because I'm sure your level of stress, which you've probably acclimated to, it has to be higher than the average person, because you're looking into all these things that can happen at any moment and you're hyper aware of them. You're not just the average person might have knowledge that this can happen, but you're hyper aware of, okay, if it does happen, this is exactly what will go down.
Yeah. And so before I got into nuclear stuff, I did cancer research. And so I've sort of been on the sort of both sides of the nuclear weapon side, but I also have a background of like, how does radiation affect the body? It's all not good. it's not stuff you want to know, because none of it's reassuring. But yeah, like you're just, I don't know. You're just constantly, aware of, I'll say, like, before I got into the nuclear weapons, I assumed that all of it had been very well thought out and was really well done and because nuclear weapons are so consequential. I was like, everything, I'll trust the people who work on that stuff, who made the policies in the US government back in like the 60s or whatever, that they did it well and that it's all sensical. The more I studied, the more that assumption got like chipped away at. And like a lot of you learn that like a lot of the decisions that get made around nuclear weapons aren't necessarily made for the right reasons. So there's one story during I think it was whenever Robert McNamara was at he was the Secretary of Defense, I think. So they were trying to figure out how many nuclear weapons the US should have, or how many missiles. And at the time, they thought the Soviets had a bunch. The Soviets really didn't have very many, but they thought they did, or they thought they might. And so the US was like trying to figure out, okay, how do we size our arsenal based on all of the competing pressures? So like the Navy wanted some, the Air Force wanted some. So they're all like pushing for more weapons. So the Secretary of Defense was like, okay, we'll have to figure out how many we're going to allow, how many missiles we're going to allow. And then they settled on the number like 1,000. Not because it made sense, but because it was a nice round number that everyone would like agree with.
Yeah.
So it's like just little stuff like that kind of really chips away at your your like assumptions that all of this stuff is really well thought out.
It's hilarious that someone's trying to figure out the number of nuclear weapons they should keep in their arsenal based on the same reasoning that I set my alarm clock at 6:30 instead of 6:27, because I'm like, oh, you know, it just looks better. So, you know, why not have 1,000 nukes?
It's just a very human, you know, and I think that's the thing to remember is that all of the nuclear everything, it's all the result of human choices. And so, you know, every single one of those choices falls prey to the same issues that all of our other decisions fall prey to. Like, you know, we're not always the most logical folks.
Well, in terms of power, it goes God, rounding up, and then nuclear weapons. So it's good to know that nuclear weapons still fall under the rounding up principle.
Yeah. I did want to get back to you did ask about the hair trigger stuff.
Yeah.
So I did want to talk about that because that's definitely
absolutely.
a thing. So it usually gets referred to as like launch under attack or launch on warning. The idea is that like if the U.S. has a bunch of weapons in its nuclear missile silos. Russia has the same. The idea is that if, say, Russia attacked the U.S. or vice versa. So if Russia launches its missiles to try to attack the U.S., they're probably going to shoot a lot of those missiles at the U.S. missile silos. The idea being is that if, you know, Russian missiles can get to Montana and blow up those silos before the missiles launch, they're not getting fired back in response. The problem is that those missiles take like a half hour to get there. Just like flight time between middle of Russia and middle of the US is like a half hour. So there's this window where you can detect missile launches like a minute and a half, kind of that area after they launch. So once the missile like breaks through the clouds, there's satellites up there watching above the clouds that can pick up the
Is it the actual imagery? Is it a heat signature that detects it? What's the first sign of a nuclear launch?
Yeah, so it's the heat. Yeah, exactly. There's infrared satellites, cameras, basically up in like geostationary orbit, and then there's some other high orbits, and they're always like scanning the Earth looking for these missile heat signatures. And so when it's like below the clouds, you're just not going to necessarily see it. But once it gets above the clouds, then you'll see this like big bright rocket plume. And so that's like the first sort of indication that the U.S. would see of like a Russian attack, or vice versa. You know, if the U.S. attacked Russia. Once the missiles are in flight, then you have radars kind of scattered around the world. The radars can't really see the whole world because they're on the ground, so they're kind of limited by the local horizon. So but you can use those to try to pick up on the missiles as they're flying through space and confirm that what you're seeing on your infrared satellite is real. So that whole process takes a few minutes. There's a really good timeline from, I think it's the Nuclear Threat Initiative, about the timeline involved with this launch under attack thing, this like hair trigger response. So you get like a couple minutes to detect and then confirm that the missile, like there's a missile flying towards you. And then you got like a couple minutes to go track down the president. And then he's got like a couple minutes to decide, do I fire all of the weapons? Do I fire, what do I do? And that could involve, firing a bunch of nukes back at Russia. And then you have to transmit that order to the silos. The missiles have to launch and they have to get clear of the silos before the missiles come in. So the whole thing happens on like a half-hour timeline. So you have this like possibility that the president might have to decide to annihilate the planet in like 7 minutes with no warning. Like he might be on the toilet and someone runs in and be like, hey, you need to make this decision.
Dropping a nuke while launching a nuke. There you go.
Yeah. So like, that's sort of this like hair trigger launch thing. It's like, that's how it has to be set up because these timelines are so short. And the reason why countries do this is like the reason why they resort to it. It's obviously quite risky, but it's because the U.S. was concerned that Russia might have the ability to disarm, like attack them preemptively and blow up all their nukes and disarm them. And like Russia and China have the same concerns about the U.S. attacking them now. So because they're worried like the reason why you have launch under attack is because you're worried that your adversary is going to attack you to try to disarm you, to get rid of your nuclear weapons. So you run these, like, put yourself in this like really risky situation so that the other side is less inclined to attack you because, they don't think they can do it before you can shoot your stuff back. But then you run into this issue with like the training tape thing. So like, luckily that one got they confirmed that an attack wasn't happening. But like, you can imagine if like you get the first detection of a launch, and then the president has to start deciding, like, do I use nuclear missiles? You got a pretty narrow window in there to make sure what you're seeing is real. Luckily, it's held up so far. But.
Did you see that clip that went viral of Jon Stewart on the Colbert Show talking about the COVID lab leak?
No, I haven't seen that.
So it's hilarious. You should look it up. It's about 5 minutes. You could watch it in less time than it takes the president to decide to launch a nuclear weapon. And he says towards the end of the clip, he's talking about the situation in China and the credibility of the lab leak. And he says, the last thing I imagine that's going to happen in this world before the world ends, the world gets blown up somehow, is a scientist in the lab going, it worked. And then the whole lab blows up. Now hearing this, it makes me think the last thing that's going to be uttered on Earth is some 27-year-old intern in a nuclear launch facility. Everything's ready to go. And he's looking at the computer and saying, wait, it's a bird. And then the dude pressed the button and nuclear war, nuclear winter. There we go.
Yeah. So that's, that's the concern. So that's why we want to do what we can to cool things down so that people don't feel the need to be on doing these crazy things.
Do you think there's any credibility?
Can we pause
bathroom break? Yeah. I'm gonna take one too. So talking about the potential of a global nuclear apocalypse, I wanted to ask you, do you think there's any credibility to the theory as to the reason why we don't see aliens is because there are millions of civilizations that have also existed, but once they develop the capability of something like a nuclear weapon, that civilization then destroys themselves? Do you think there's any credibility to that theory, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the reason why we don't see aliens is just because the universe is huge. And it takes so long for even light to get anywhere that we're not going to, we've only been listening to radio frequencies for 200 years? So it's a very narrow window. I think other life must exist out there. The universe is a big place. I don't think we're going to see it just because the universe is such a big place. In terms of other, any life developing nuclear weapons and then ending itself, I can see how it would happen. Like that, definitely that part makes sense to me. I'm a little surprised we haven't. And again, that's why I have the belief that I think we should eventually get rid of nuclear weapons, is because if we keep them around for too long, something's gonna go sideways.
Yeah. So let's say that the planet gets rid of all of its nuclear weapons 100 years from now, and the glimmer of positive light that you see in the midst of all this darkness, we somehow manage to maneuver through that lit opening. What would the next few decades look like if 100 years from now we were to actually rid the planet of all the nuclear weapons? What would happen? What would countries have to do? What type of agreements would be made?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll take this from two ways. So one is how do you make sure nuclear weapons, once they're gone, stay gone? That's tricky. Nuclear weapons, it's 1940s technology. They're not the hardest thing to make. And we have fissile material around, just from the stuff that we use in nuclear power reactors is, a different quality than the stuff that goes into a bomb. But nuclear material can be gotten. And once you have the nuclear material, actually making it into a bomb is not so hard. So there's, got to be some way in an agreement that gets sort of nuclear weapons for countries to be sure and really to convince themselves that their adversaries are not going to rebuild nuclear weapons. So there need to be some sort of monitoring. There need to be like, but that's really hard because like a lot of the like putting a bomb together is really hard to see with like a satellite. You can do that underground in a bunker, and no one's going to be able to see that. So like there's a lot of like really tricky, hard problems that haven't been solved yet.
I was reading actually that there was a college student, allegedly, this may not be true. It was on the internet, so there's take this with a grain of salt. But I was reading an article about this college student. He might have been a Ph.D. student that was writing about nuclear weapons, and part of the project involved creating a way to build a nuclear weapon and make it usable on a low budget. So, for example, I don't remember the exact amount of money, but could you build a nuke with $100,000 or something like that? And this kid actually wrote something that made sense and from a practical standpoint could work, and then was visited by someone in the government, and they took his paper, and I don't know what happened from there. The whole story could not be true. It could just be clickbait on Reddit or something, but it seemed written. It seemed well written, and it seemed logical. And the explanation was that, like what you were saying, it's actually not that hard to build a nuclear weapon practically. It's then giving people the tools to learn how to build it.
Yeah. So I've heard a similar story about like two fresh PhDs who were going to go work for the national labs, I think. And then they got, as a project to see what would happen, given like a library card and be like, go design a nuclear weapon. And apparently came up with designs that worked. This is what I'll but the same caveats, I'm not sure how true all of it is. I do know one thing.
And you're about to say it was me. No, I'm just kidding.
No. But I won't say who it was just because it's not really my story to tell. But I do know someone who had part of their PhD thesis taken and classified by the FBI because it had information that was not suitable for public consumption on that. So like that stuff has happened. I do know that for sure. So but like so the bombs aren't hard to make. Once you have the hard part is getting the nuclear material. So there would need to be some way of keeping an eye on people trying to clandestinely build nuclear weapons. The other thing, the other possible way to like get weapons back after you get officially get rid of them is like you just stash a couple, because like the US and Russia have like 5,000-6,000 each. What's one weapon out of 5,000 or 6,000? Like it's easy to picture. That being said, once you've got a really old nuclear weapon, it becomes very unreliable. Like nuclear weapons need a lot of maintenance to stay usable. Just because they're made out of radioactive material that's decaying and it's like messing up all the explosives and the electronics and stuff. So like some effort would have to go into making it happen, but like, so you need a way to like account for that. I haven't seen, like that's an open question still. I haven't seen a convincing explanation of how that would be done. Once you do get into a world where there are no nuclear weapons, if at that point, say 100 years in the future, missile defenses do work, then those become useful because you're not going to be facing an adversary with 1,500 weapons. You're going to be facing an adversary with 5. And then having 40 ballistic missile interceptors maybe is enough. But again, like how do you, if you want to make ballistic missile defenses work, you need to develop them. And if you're developing them, they're causing troubles while you still have nuclear weapons. So there's issues there. So those are like two of the main ones that jump out at me is like, how do you actually make it less attractive, or how do you deal with the fact that someone might try to rearm after disarming? That's a big question. The other issue is that there's certainly this narrative that nuclear weapons have been part of the reason why we haven't had what everyone calls a great power war. Basically what they mean is like the US and Russia haven't gone to war. And like there hasn't been a big like world war since World War II. Part of the explanation for that, people have talk about a lot in nuclear weapons policy and nuclear sort of political science stuff, is that nuclear weapons make it so that like U.S. knows it doesn't want to get into a shooting war with Russia. We saw this with the Ukraine, right? Because there's this risk of nuclear annihilation. So that has like a pacifying effect on these big like World War kind of things. So if you take nuclear weapons away, maybe there's sort of those incentives for not having these big wars also start to lessen a bit. So you could envision, in a world with nuclear weapons, maybe having a larger war. I don't know how well that argument holds up with like all the brand new technologies we have, the cyber weapons and precision conventional weapons and stuff like that. There's maybe an argument to be made that the world has so much changed since World War II that these, that's less of a concern or like a smaller concern. And there's also like a lot of things that like the development of nuclear weapons have coincided with this like long peace since the World War II. But other things have changed, like globalization's been a thing. So like it's murky. And the other thing is that like, pretty clearly we haven't had these great power wars, but like there's definitely been wars since World War II. There's one going on right now. So like, it's one of I briefly mentioned earlier in political science called the stability-instability paradox. It's not a paradox, but they're just terrible at naming things. But basically the idea is that like big wars get deterred because this threat of nuclear annihilation happens. But you're not going to use nuclear weapons to deal with small problems. And there's going to be a threshold. So below that threshold, everything's fair game because no one's going to use nuclear weapons. So like Russia can invade Ukraine and not worry about getting nuked. But Russia can't invade the U.S. So
do you see the number of nuclear weapons, and assuming we're still living in the reality of 100 years from now that there will be no nuclear weapons, just as an example, if you continue that from now until 100 years later, do you see the number of nuclear weapons dropping off the table? Like we keep our nukes and then all of a sudden a bunch of nuclear powers take a leap of faith and get rid of them? Is it a gradual decline? Will one nuclear power have to come out and take a solo leap of faith and say, look, we're going to start, the US, let's say we just said like, fuck it, we're just going to see what happens. Will it be something like that, or will it be more of a gradual decline?
Yeah, predictions are hard, especially about the future. But I think like near term, so we're at like 1,500 deployed weapons between U.S. and Russia, and those are kind of the two main players right now. I think there's room for them to go down to like 1,000-ish without too much really needing to change, like without like big picture kind of changes. Once you start hitting that number, then you need to start drawing in the other countries like China, UK, France, and then you also have this other issue where the countries like India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea are not part of a lot of like the treaties and organizations. Like they developed weapons after the nonproliferation treaty went into effect. So they're like, they did it illegally, so to speak. So you're going to have issues with like bringing them into the fold of just like political issues. So like probably get down to about 1,000 and then start bringing in the other ones. And then from there, it's like you're probably chipping away in kind of small increments, maybe getting down to 500 or something like that. And then once you get down to really low numbers, or even like a couple hundred, I don't know. Like I think at some point there is going to need to be somewhat of a leap of faith, where everyone's just going to have to go for it. I don't think anyone's going to be able to do it unilaterally. Like I don't think the US is just going to be like, all right, I'm going to give up my stuff. Just because I don't think they would do that. Because they're so worried about this like balance between Russia and the US and then China. But eventually, like to get rid of nuclear weapons, you need to like believe that you need to get rid of them. So like at some point, it's going to need to be like the prevailing idea in the government that like this has to happen. And once you get that like political will to make that happen, then you make it happen. I'm personally I'm fairly cautious by nature. So I would the way I would think about it is that you need to like have it get to the point where you've maybe got a couple hundred and then figure out exactly how everything's going to work when you're at zero. And then you just go to zero and then you put that in place. Or maybe you put it in place in advance kind of thing. And like, sort of that's why, the slow and steady approach kind of appeals to me. So I like to answer your question with both possible answers. I think it'll need to be gradual for a while, and then eventually you're going to have to just make that jump.
Yeah, it's so tough because for any change to happen, a global change, there needs to be one person to take an unpopular lead, but also a meaningful lead, or else other countries aren't going to feel like they should actually give up their nuclear weapons. And so I mean, there's so many factors that go into it. And again, I'm just talking from my own, dumb opinion, but it seems like one of the top nuclear powers would have to take the huge risk of getting rid of almost all or all of their nuclear weapons at once. And then a smaller nuclear power like North Korea might be like, oh shit, like the US has less nuclear weapons than us. Maybe we should give away a few too, or other nuclear powers, Belgium, Germany. I don't know. It's a huge pipe dream. If we're living in an idealistic world, like I lay down my sword, so you lay it down too. But I don't see how other countries will have faith, because you are taking a leap of faith. You don't have, like you said, you can't tell the future. So you're taking an educated guess and educated action that, okay, if we lay down our arms, these countries are also going to follow suit eventually in the long term, even though if it doesn't happen all at once, that we need to, as a superpower, take the lead here.
Yeah, I think the way I see it is that probably the last 2 to 3 countries that will have nuclear weapons will be the US, Russia, and China. I think by the time they get down to super low numbers, like by super low, I mean like a couple hundred, which is not that low.
Yeah.
But once they start getting down to that, yeah, a couple dozen. I would assume by that point, the other smaller nuclear powers will have had to get rid of their weapons, perhaps in exchange for something, in order for the US, Russia, and now probably China to feel comfortable getting rid of, taking that last step. I think also it's I don't think one country is going to, do it unilaterally, like just go make a principled stand to do it and hope the other ones follow suit. I think it's probably going to be much slower and very well planned out in advance of how it's going to work once we've all got rid of our weapons. And then we'll start taking these little steps back and forth to get there. So say we have 200 weapons left, maybe okay, I'll get rid of 50, you get rid of 50. You close this base down, I'll close that base down. And then we'll go look at each other's bases to make sure there's no nuclear support system still there. Stuff like that. I think there's going to be a lot of little inching back and forth. It's the only way I see it happening. And then the other thing is I think it was it Reagan who said trust but verify.
Trust
it's
but verify.
So the whole idea of verification is probably I would imagine these countries are not going to get into these very consequential positions where they're getting rid of their nuclear weapons without a way to convince reassure themselves that everyone else is holding up their end. I don't know how that's going to work because it's a super tricky problem, but there's got to be some verification aspect to it. Which, hopefully provides me with enough fodder for the rest of my career before I retire to always have stuff to work on.
Or another technology comes along that has the same effect of something like a nuclear weapon, but doesn't have the same devastating physical consequences. So something, whether it's something in the metaverse or cybersecurity, taking entire financial systems offline, that could have the consequence of starving hundreds of millions of people in the short term, like a nuclear war could. If you could do that and flip a switch on a switchboard somewhere rather than launch a nuclear weapon, maybe countries would give up their nukes for that reason, a much darker reason, which is why do we need these physical nukes anymore when we can just have a metaverse nuke and, destroy countries in the cyberspace?
Yeah, that's actually a thing people talk about these days, of like how are emerging technologies like cyber, like precision, conventional stuff like that. Hypersonic weapons get brought up a lot. Like, might those one day replace the capabilities that we today use nukes for? It's always possible. And, ideally it's not a spot where you're like trading one evil for a slightly different evil. Cause like that kind of, to a degree happened already. Is that there's an arms control agreement called the Biological Weapons Convention that outlaws biological weapons. So almost all countries are signed, if not all. And they agreed that like, we will not have biological weapons. We will not develop biological weapons. It is very hard to verify because a lot of the same technologies that go into just commercial biotech stuff that we're using for cancer research or making insulin or whatever, like a lot of that same stuff is the same kind of thing you would need to make biological weapons. So it's actually like a trickier verification problem than nuclear weapons. But everyone was comfortable being like, okay, we'll just give up biological weapons and not use them, in part because nuclear weapons existed and nuclear weapons were much more reliable. And so they're like, okay, we don't need this horrifying and slightly less useful, but like weapon of mass destruction, because we've already got good ones. So in the sense that's already happened. And it might happen again. But who's to say what the next big awful doomsday weapon's going to be?
Yeah. Yeah. To zoom back out, or to zoom back in rather, from doomsday into the current situation with Russia and Ukraine, I've seen some publications like the New York Times publish articles recently that they don't directly come out and say that tactical nuclear weapons aren't that bad, but the article has an air to it where it's like, it's the safer alternative to a strategic nuclear weapon. Like it's like going vegan versus vegetarian. Vegan is going all in, but you could start with vegetarian first before you get to the tactical nuke. What do you think about the sort of language that is, I don't want to say encouraging people to think that a tactical nuclear weapon isn't that bad, but opening the door at least to quell people's expectations because this version of a nuke is not as bad as the strategic version of a nuke?
Yeah, that whole like thread of people arguing that kind of stuff really gets so like my PhD thesis was like trying to refute a lot of, not that specific claims, but a lot of like similar claims to that, of people like, hey, nuclear war probably not that bad if we do it right. I don't believe that, just in no small part because as soon as you start using any nuclear weapon, then you're in a nuclear war, and a lot of stuff can go bad in a nuclear war. And who's to say if you use a tactical nuclear weapon that the other side's not going to respond with a strategic one? And then as soon as that happens, then perhaps they all go and, nuclear winter. In terms of like tactical nuclear weapons being not so bad, that's, I don't want to say it's per se wrong, but like it's a little misleading. I'll say that. So the idea is that like when you hear about like tactical or non-strategic nuclear weapons, it implies that they're small, and they can be smaller than a lot of the strategic ones, in terms of like the payload of the warhead, like the yield of the warhead, how big the explosion is. But that's not necessarily true. So like some of the U.S. sub-launched ballistic missile warheads, the yield is thought to be about 100 kilotons. So to put that in perspective, that's like 6 times the size of the Hiroshima Nagasaki bombs. So about 6 times that. The U.S. B-6112, the bombs that the U.S. has in Europe, the tactical ones, they have what's called the Dally yield, so you can kind of select how big the thing's going to be. The upper end of that is like, it's like 120 or 130 kilotons. It's larger than the strategic ones. It can be dialed lower. It can be dialed down to like 0.2, which is much smaller. But at the end of the day, it's like, just because like the distinction between tactical and strategic is how they're delivered. It's not necessarily the size of the warhead. And so like, you can't say definitively that a tactical nuclear weapon can be smaller. And even if it is, it's like there's still, you're crossing this threshold of going from no one has used nuclear weapons since 1945 to I have now introduced nuclear weapons into this conflict. And like that can get real out of hand real quick because like if Russia, say in Ukraine, I don't think this is going to happen, mind you, but like if Russia in Ukraine decided to use a small nuclear weapon, the US, like it's going to be hard pressed to just let that go because like there's been this norm of no one using them. And all of a sudden it's like, well, we can't just let you run around the world nuking things. Like that's not okay behavior. And so, you know, you get in the spot where like, okay, well, how do you respond? It's like the sort of, you know, most hopeful case is they're like, okay, we're not going to respond with nuclear weapons, but we're going to use our conventional assets or something else to like respond in a way that imposes costs on you without still fighting the nuclear fight. But maybe that doesn't work, or maybe they instead decide to like just fire one nuclear, like, so if Russia uses one, then maybe the US is like, okay, well, I'll use one. And then Russia's like, okay, so maybe I'll use two. It always like pushes it, throws, it just hits the tennis ball back and forth across the net kind of thing. Yeah. So there's like all these, it's just like as soon as you start using nuclear weapons, just like the pressure and the chances of more nuclear weapons being used just goes up and up and up and up. So the idea that you can like use a nuclear weapon safely and like control everything after the fact, I think is just kind of nonsense.
I appreciate the good quality information on tactical nuclear weapons, because when a word like tactical becomes hot in the news, trying to find legitimate information on it, not just in the New York Times, but in any publication, it's hilarious. I'll read an article by, you know, a quote unquote journalist on tactical nuclear weapons saying, you know, they're not that bad and all this stuff, and we shouldn't be as worried. And the day before, they're writing an Oscars think piece on the Will Smith slap. And I'm like, how is this like, I know your boss just told you write something with tactical nukes in the title because that's trending right now on Google. So you have the legitimate risk and the legitimate concern of tactical nuclear weapons. And then for the average person like myself, just sorting through information, I'm like, is it that bad? You know, am I going to die tomorrow? Should I be like, tactical nukes are just like grenades and they're not, you know, it's just going to blow up this one spot. It's not going to harm anything else. So it's difficult to get good information. So I appreciate the you know, this whole podcast in general, but just the knowledge that you have and other scientists that you work with have by sharing this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that because I literally had this exact same conversation with my wife like last week. I think she read the same article. It's like, you know, came to me and was like, "Does this all make sense?" It's like, yeah. So it could be frustrating, and like I can understand how it happens. Like these are all things people care about, and people, you know, understand some stuff about nuclear weapons for sure. But like a lot of the like, does it matter, does it not stuff comes down to these like really fine technical details that no one that are so in the weeds that like a normal person's not going to care about or know about. So, you know, it's very understandable how this kind of stuff happens.
So to put you on the spot, if you could have 5 minutes on a direct phone line with Putin to give him a tight 5 messaging, kind of like a stand-up comic has their tight 5 when they go on a late night show. If you could have a tight 5 direct phone call with Putin to tell him anything you wanted about nuclear weapons and the effect that a tactical nuke or strategic nuke, whatever, just get something into his head, not a guarantee he'll listen, but just a guarantee you'll be able to talk to him and he'll be on the line for 5 minutes. What are the main points you would want to hit on?
So that's the thing is, I don't know how much I could tell him that he doesn't already know. is the thing is like, I think he's very aware of the like nuclear weapons and how to make use of them without using them. And I think he just accepts that. And he's just willing to take those risks to like do the stuff he wants to do because he thinks it's more important to resurrect the Soviet Union or like, to reclaim some of Russia's lost glory. So he's willing to run these risks that, I personally wouldn't.
But that would be a good place to start. That would be a good place to start, though. You could say, listen, if you want to resurrect the Soviet Union, it would be in the Soviet Union's best long-term interest to not launch a nuclear weapon, because if you do, you'll be blown off the map, and then you'll be able to build you could go back to the 1950s if you want, but getting a nuclear weapon and launching it is not going to bring you there. To align his interest with not launching a nuke, that to me seems like a really good place to start, bringing up the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, so the thing is, I think he's very much aware of the risks inherent in doing that. There's sort of like I think it was like a Russian journalist or maybe someone on a TV show said recently that filtered over this way. It's like, what's the point of having a world if Russia's not in it? So there's this idea that if, Russia doesn't exist, why do we care what happens elsewhere? So what I think, this like Russia's lost glory, or even just like Russia as a going concern, like keeping Russia as like as an intact entity. I think he sees that as an existential issue. Like he sees that as like the only thing keeping him alive, because he has gone on record like being very critical of what happened to Muammar Gaddafi, who gave up so Muammar Gaddafi in Libya like gave up his nuclear weapons a while ago, and then 20 years later, however long it was later, got invaded, deposed, and shot and killed in a ditch. And so he's like I think he's worries that might be him. So for him, it is a matter of life and death. And so taking these little risks that he is willing to risk, taking the chance on the outcome that he gets away with it. So I don't know what it's kind of like almost like a nihilistic worldview that I think you might have, that like, yeah. I don't know how you reason with that. Like, because when I worry about nuclear weapons, I don't so much worry that people will start a nuclear war intentionally. I think that could happen, but I think the real risk is sort of like, or the larger risk, I should say, is just accidents and misperceptions and stuff. And like, we set up the nuclear weapons with these like hair triggers and stuff to deal with these issues that run these risks that eventually we're going to have to pay up on. But that's like a very long-term concern. And so I think if you're worried about, am I going to be shot and killed in a ditch tomorrow, this like long-term risk proposition is much less compelling. So
that's true.
Yeah. Sorry. Sorry, this is a really pessimistic take on it.
It's pessimistic, but it's also necessary to hear. And, that's something I wasn't thinking about much, is the fact that Putin may be expecting that he's going to be taken out. He's going to be assassinated, or his country's going to try to throw him out of power. And Biden just came out and said the other day that Putin cannot remain in power, and other countries are like, whoa, like, shut the fuck up, because you may actually, this guy has got his back against the wall. You have media saying that Russia's losing the war, and even though Ukraine's putting up a hell of a fight, it's just not true that Russia's losing. And so Putin sees all this, he sees what world leaders are saying, and if anything, you want to stroke this guy's ego a little bit. You want to err on the side of, all right, what's the harm if he feels good a little bit, if he's letting off the gas. So it's a tough situation.
Yeah. So if I can like flip your question around a little bit, maybe I don't call Putin, but I call Biden, because I think he has some leeway. Like Putin has, I think, the most agency, like the most choices to make in this whole thing. But I think Biden also has some chance to change the world for the better, but or to help resolve this situation. But I think it kind of goes to what you're saying, but rather than just stroke his ego, what I think you need to do is give him an out. You need to give him like a future he can envision that he's in it, and that that future that he is in is one where there is peace between Russia and Ukraine. Like, you need to give him like an off ramp so that he has has a place he can envision himself landing that stops the war, but also lets him keep living. Because I can understand how like it's distasteful to think about giving him something or like helping Putin achieve his goals, when really it's about he's gonna do what he's gonna do to pursue his goals. So what you need to do is nudge his goals so that they align with yours, so that he makes the choices that he can make that lead to peace between Ukraine and Russia. So I think like one of the big concerns in Russia is that their economy is just getting smashed by these sanctions. Like they got basically removed from the international banking system. So like you can't trade rubles for US dollars.
Yeah.
So like they're super isolated, and like all of these sanctions went on at the beginning of the invasion. And I think a lot of people were surprised at how unified and harsh the West was, including some people in the West. So they snapped all these sanctions on that are like crippling the Russian economy. And if the Russian economy falls apart, then Putin's maybe worried that, he'll lose his domestic base. Then like no one's talked about what happens, like how do you get the sanctions off in exchange for peace between Russia and Ukraine? Like what are the conditions where those sanctions that are wrecking the Russian economy, when do those end? Because right now they're just sort of like punishment. But there's no incentive for him to stop, because he doesn't see a world where it's like, okay, if I get a peace agreement with Ukraine now, then the sanctions come off, and then, I have a future again. So I think if I were talking to Biden, I think the West and the US can take leadership of this, is like come up with a way, like make it clear that if Russia wants to come back into the fold, like wants to stop being isolated and wants to have these sanctions come off, that only is going to happen if he stops hostilities in Ukraine. Because I think, he's not going to stop unless he sees a way out for himself.
Get communication and providing a way out that makes Putin look good. That's leadership 101, because for Biden, he's obviously trying to be strong with his messaging. He's coming out and saying, take this guy out of power. But if you're trying to do what's for the good of the people, if you're trying to do what's good for global citizens, you may have to do something that takes that gives a blow to your ego, where people say, you're a cuck for Putin. How could you let him get out of this situation with that? But at the end of that tunnel is a more peaceful place than when you started. And I don't know, it seems like there's something missing. It seems like there should be some yearly meetup between all these global nuclear powers, where the leader of the largest nuclear powers, there's like 8 or 9 of them, something like that, everyone who has nukes. So you get Putin, you get Biden, you get Xi Jinping, you get Kim Jong-un, and then whatever happens once a year, you drop everything, and for a weekend they just all go party in Ibiza, and it's like it's like a Thanksgiving break. No matter what's going on in the world, everyone goes home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. You just, and it sounds like, yes, there is a joking aspect to it, but if the nuclear arms race is a dick measuring contest, which there are a lot of aspects to it that definitely seem similar to it, where you're just kind of building up shit because it's shiny and sparkly and you want more of it, like a muscle car. You want to have the biggest dick in the room. Dick measuring contests end one of two ways. You either build up the pressure and you build up the tension and you eventually fight, or you go out, you get fucked up together, you spend time together, and you're like, oh, this guy, he's not so bad. We want the same things for our countries in different ways, more or less. So I don't know. There's something. It seems like there's a big void where there needs to be just this acknowledgement. If you could get something on the table between global powers, where no matter what happens that year, you could be in the middle of a war, there's going to be a ceasefire for a weekend on neutral ground, and you just get together and you just hash it out for 3 days, and then at the end of 3 days you go back and do whatever you want.
Well, I mean, look, so to the first part of what you said, yeah, I agree that, stopping the war in Ukraine, saving Ukrainian people's lives is more important than showing Putin up or punishing him or making him look bad or whatever. Like, at the end of the day, it's more important to save people's lives. I believe in that very thoroughly. As to the second part, I think, there was originally an intention of like, that's sort of what the United Nations was kind of supposed to be. And it's kind of just turned into another, arena where these countries kind of jockey for position and kind of try to throw their weight around and fight for their interests. The whole idea of arms control did come out of like the US and the Soviets being like, hey, we almost just had a nuclear apocalypse. We should probably, recognizing that like nuclear wars can't be fought in one. And recently the nuclear powers put out a statement, like a joint statement saying that, reaffirming that a nuclear war should not be fought or like can't be won. So should not be fought. So like the idea is there. It's just like it often takes a backseat to like the crisis of the day that's happening. Back in the Cold War days, like the US and the Soviets would keep up doing a lot of their arms control stuff in the background, even when like stuff was going bad. Maybe not putting new agreements together, but they were still, working together because they realized that a nuclear arms race is not good for anyone. So there's precedent for that. But I think sort of with the fall of the Soviet Union and everything since then, a lot of the arms control agreements that were put in place during the Cold War have fallen apart since then. The anti-ballistic missile treaty that we talked about, there was another one called the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF, that Russia cheated on recently, so that fell apart. There's one called Open Skies where they would like fly planes over each other's territory to check stuff out. That fell apart under the Trump administration. So like a lot of these like threads that kind of held things together in the Cold War have just been slowly pulled apart. Partly, I think, just because like after the Cold War, this like specter of nuclear apocalypse kind of died down a bit and it pushed to the background. And so we were like, okay, it's kind of like COVID, where it's like early on in COVID, they would, you'd have a big spike and then they'd ratchet up the measures and everyone would be wearing masks and stuff. And then as soon as the case numbers would drop, they would take off all the restrictions. And then you take out but the restrictions were working. That's why the case numbers dropped. And so like that kind of I think that is that mindset that kind of puts us in the spot now where we've pulled apart a lot of the arms control guardrails that helped with a lot of this stuff. And now we're facing a world where we don't have any we have fewer guardrails keeping things together. So I think we need to be pretty active in putting them back on. Yeah.
You shared a super interesting piece on Twitter a couple months back. It was called Deep Minds, David Silver on Games, Beauty, and AI's Potential to Avert Human-Made Disasters, which would certainly apply to nuclear weapons. And one of the parts of this article, it says that humans want to believe that we've got this special capacity called quote unquote creativity that our algorithms don't or won't have. It's a fallacy. We've already seen the beginnings of creativity in our AIs, and that's David Silver who said that. So I wanted to ask you, how do you anticipate AI being integrated into nuclear weapons arms control? I'm sure there are things that are integrating AI already. And can you talk about some of the creativity that AI could add that may take humans too long? So some of the ways we could benefit from AI combining and integrating with nuclear arms control right now.
Yeah, so that article, my like hot take on it was that he was very optimistic about what AI can do. I will agree with him that our brains are biological computers, and so like I can see why. Like I don't see why there's necessarily a distinction between a very, very complex computer and our brain. Like you could eventually build a computer that could rival our brain. I believe that. I think it's really far away. So a lot of the like talks about AI revolutionizing nuclear these days are usually around like how do we use AI to stitch together satellite images so that we can keep track of another side's nuclear weapons, where they're hiding them, so that we can attack them? Or like, how do we use AI to make missile defense work? Like, because like we said, that, there's this issue where you've got a real warhead and then like 100 decoys or whatever, and then you need to pick the right one. I think we're like, when we discuss AI, we really treat it like this sort of like secret sauce that you just throw on and it fixes everything. And I think a lot of these problems like aren't necessarily fixable with AI. And it's not that like, it's like when we think about what, if a computer can maybe be as good as a human brain, like I'll agree with that eventually. But at the same time, it's like a lot of these problems we're trying to solve, human brains also can't solve. Like, it's not like, it's not because we necessarily don't have enough computer powers. Like, maybe the problem's just intractable. Like, we can't deal with it. So like when you're talking about the ballistic missiles and all the decoys, it's like they might all just look the same. And then it doesn't matter how much computing power you throw at it if like the signal's not there. So I'm very skeptical of AI in the near term making these sort of very risky things like conducting a nuclear disarming attack more feasible. But then like I also think like it could play a role in arms control and like in verification. In like we can use it constructively. It doesn't have to be a destructive force. There's actually a great article on this, I can't remember who it's by, about how AI might improve be a positive for peace and not doing these like disruptive things. So like maybe verification down the road, if we're looking for people clandestinely putting nuclear bombs together in a bunker, maybe there's, something in tracking traffic patterns or something that might, help us flag places of interest that like probably won't be a smoking gun, but maybe if you're like, okay, we've picked up a couple things that look a little sketchy, maybe we can send inspectors there and have that be part of the agreement. I think it's going to become like inevitably, it's just like going to be part of our lives. It's just like, it's such a broad, also just such like a broad term, like there's so much falls under it. So I'm skeptical in the short term, but I'm optimistic in the long term, I guess.
Yeah. Going off of the problems that humans can't solve right now with nuclear weapons, something I found fascinating that David Silver mentioned in the article is that you may not want to give AI a goal at a certain point when it becomes good at creating solutions to the goals that you give the AI. You may just want to let it run on its own, which sounds very exciting and extremely scary and apocalyptic at the same time. In the best case scenario, you let AI run and then it does things that you like and that you don't like. So you reward it for doing things that you like. You nudge it and say like, good, like do more of that. That worked. And it may not have been a solution that you even thought of. And then when it does something you don't like, you say, like never do this again, whatever. So maybe there's a solution that humans just aren't seeing right now that 200 years from now, if we do get to a place, 1,000 years from now, who knows, where we have zero nuclear weapons on the planet, it might be an AI generated solution that opened our eyes somehow to take action.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It goes back to predictions are hard, especially about the future. But I mean, it's certainly like a glimmer of hope that there's, I think, a possible constructive way to use it. A lot of the like discussion around AI, I feel like these days gets very wrapped up in the kind of negative stuff, the Skynet kind of things, and neglect. I don't know if you ever watched the movie War Games.
No, I haven't.
Oh, okay. At the very end, spoilers, just fair warning, it has been out for like 30 to 40 years. So,
damn it.
Basically, there's an AI takes control of the nuclear weapons, the US's nuclear weapons at NORAD. And then the way it tries to figure out how to nuke the Russians, I think, to win. And then the way I believe Matthew Broderick solves the problem is it has it play tic-tac-toe against itself. And you can't win a game of tic-tac-toe. So it eventually concludes that the only way to win is not to play. And then takes that lesson and applies it to nuclear weapons. Yeah. So maybe it already got figured out by Matthew Broderick.
Maybe. That would be hilarious. You know, he's the one on the phone line, the direct line with Putin for 5 minutes, and he goes into a soundproof room. All the generals can't hear what he's saying, and then Putin calls Biden 5 minutes later and says, you know, I'm stepping out of Ukraine, and everyone's looking at Matthew Broderick like, what the hell did you say? And he's just like, it's between me and Putin. Sorry.
Can't hurt to try.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Exactly. To try anything. So David Silver also says about AI, he says, we've built something that's adding to the spectrum of intelligence. We should do this not because of what it does or how it helps us, but because intelligence is a beautiful thing. So for you, you're working every day on nuclear policy and ways to transform the nuclear weapon landscape. What do you find beautiful about nuclear policy? A super cheesy question, but like nuclear weapons, nuclear policy, it's hard to not find the beauty in things that you work on every day. Is there anything you find particularly beautiful about it?
So I'll give you two answers that are very diametrically opposed. So I'll start with the bad answer. And that's like nuclear weapons, the science behind it. It's super interesting. It's super crazy. It's super cool. It's like these conditions that exist kind of nowhere else in the world happen. And, you know, you have these fissions going on in a nuclear bomb, and then there's, you know, X-rays moving through the plasma and hitting the secondary and making the explosion bigger. The science is crazy awesome. And that, I think, is what drew a lot of scientists in to work on nuclear weapons after that. I mean, early on, it was like, let's beat the Nazis. And then later on, a lot of weapons designers, I think, get drawn in because the science is so cool. And that's part of what kind of dragged me into working on these nuclear weapons issues. One of the other things that a lot of the nuclear weapons designers eventually figured out is that the science is super cool, but you're using it to kill people. So you really need to ground the like super cool, awesome science in the fact that these are weapons and they're designed to, you know, destroy life and intelligence. So there's beauty there, but it's like tainted almost. In terms of actual nuclear policy, the super cheesy, easy answer is just that like sometimes cooperation works. And like sometimes people can realize that like, it's not, when there's something like a nuclear arms race that's in no one's interest, and all of the like short-term pressures are pushing you to like just go harder and harder and harder and try to win the race. Sometimes people have shown the capability to step back from the brink and be like, all right, let's hug it out essentially. And let's get off this treadmill and do something.
Let's go party in Ibiza with the rest of the world leaders for 3 days, and then we'll go back.
Exactly. So, there's something positive in all of the nuclear issues.
It's hard to ground the coolness factor when you're working on something that has such drastic consequences when it goes wrong. Because if I'm trying something new in podcasting, if I want to make, reels using certain graphics, and I'm saying, all right, I'll try this week, there's very little to no consequences of that going wrong. But when you have something like nuclear weapons and you think you have a cool idea and it can either buy us another 200 years without blowing the world up or blow the world up right now, I can't imagine trying to reel in those diametrically opposed outcomes while also trying to figure out new pathways to either in policy or the weapons themselves.
Yeah, so like early on when they were trying to figure out, like back in like the Rand days that I talked about, Fred Kaplan wrote that book about. A lot of they were talking about how to, like, basically their idea was that we have nuclear weapons, we're going to try to figure out how this deterrence thing works, which is like, I'm going to threaten you, you're going to threaten me, so neither of us is going to attack each other, which, leads to fewer World War IIs, which they had just come out of. So they're like, okay, we're preventing wars. But the way we're going to do that is by contemplating and figuring out how do we kill 200 million Russians. So there's like this really grim aspect to it. And the way they actually worked on all this stuff is that a lot of this stuff got hidden behind jargon. It's like, you don't talk about, okay, I'm going to go kill a bunch of people. They talk about, they wouldn't talk about nuking a city. They would talk about counter value targeting. So there's counter force where I'm shooting my nuke at your nuke to blow up your nuclear forces. And there's counter-value. Counter-value means nuking a city to kill a bunch of people.
Yeah, it sounds like a marketing technique with coupons.
Yeah. Yeah, so like basically they're using the language to distance themselves. There's a great piece by an author called Carol Cohn who talked about like how they, like when you're talking about nuclear weapons, you're talking about like silos, and there's a part of the thing that carries the warheads. It's called the bus, and it's all like very like the bus is taking the kids to school kind of thing. So like the way a lot of people, and it's a trap you can fall into, even like in my line of work, is when you're thinking about nuclear weapons, you start off with this base set of assumptions that can get you into a spot where you are thinking very logically, but like because you've got like a bad assumption or whatever, and then you're using all of this like kind of coded language, you kind of can lose touch with the fact that you're talking about things that kill people, and like that's or like threats of killing of people, like stuff that's really not great. So a lot of very often I have to remind myself, like the stuff I work on, which, as I said, has really cool science behind it, is at its core kind of awful.
Yeah, so. Yeah. It's like if you're trying to figure out how can I say this thing, how can I phrase this without it seeming so bad, you might want to ask yourself why you're like what it is that you're trying to say in the first place, rather than spice it up a little bit or make it seem more acceptable. It's weird because there's in every field, in media or law, medicine, there's all this complicated language, and it seems like a lot of it comes from building up these walls and barrier to entry, because if you can't figure out what shit means, how do you know how bad it is? So if someone says, we're countervaluing targets, and only a select number of people know what that language actually means in the nuclear community, then you'll have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's sort of a way to, it's kind of like drawbridge immigration. It's like you go, you study the thing, you learn all about it, and then you try to build the walls up higher so that you're protecting your career by preventing people from following you, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a thing, and it happens a ton in nuclear, in part because it's really hard to, if you're spending every day talking about your plan to better kill 200 million people, then like that weighs on you. That like doesn't matter who you are, that's gonna drag on you. So you need to, if you want to keep working on this stuff, you kind of have to find a way to put some emotional distance between it.
Like it seems very exciting and also lonely, because there's a very small number of people on the planet that truly understand what you're dealing with on a daily basis.
Yeah, the nuclear community is relatively small. It's kind of a niche thing, and a lot of the I think back in the 80s, maybe kind of Cold War era, end of the Cold War, nukes were sort of more of a hot topic and stuff people were studying, and then lately it's been more like the people who want to go make a positive impact on the world. A lot of them work on climate change stuff now, because that's sort of another big kind of similar, very consequential, complicated issue. But that one really has been grabbing people's attention, and so there's fewer people working in nukes now, which is what it is. But it's sort of I went into it because I wanted to make a positive impact, but there's certainly not a ton of people. I think I probably follow half them on Twitter at this point.
As we end off, and again, I appreciate your time, TD. Thank you so much for having this very, it's a huge chunk of time, so it's not beyond me the sacrifice of time and energy. So I just want to say thank you before we end off. Something unrelated to nuclear policy, just out of curiosity, what is something that's unrelated to your day job, not related to nuclear policy, that you will always speak your mind about when that issue comes up? You're like, I have to get my 2 cents in on this.
Oof, that's a tough question. I don't know. I'm a pretty reserved person, so I'm not going around having a lot of hot takes. Probably just that the Blue Jays are the only baseball team anyone should care about. There's I don't see why.
All right, that's a hot take. I've taken a little bit of offense to that as a New York Mets fan. We're not doing any better. We did get Stroman from you, though. So
yeah, he's a bit of a wild card.
He is. He's a Long Island boy. He's a Long Island boy. So so Blue Jays.
Yeah, I kind of came to consciousness in like the early 90s, and what some of my earliest memories are my dad like jumping off the couch when Joe Carter hit his like World Series winning grand slam in 92 or 93. And so that is stuck with me. So that's one of the things I'll go to bat for, but everything else I kind of keep close to the chest.
There you go. Nuke policy and hitting nukes, two things that, they're hitting bomb. Yeah, there's a lot of crossover terminology between nuclear weapons and baseball. I just hit that bomb. That dude hit a nuke. So maybe there's something there. The language barrier.
Yeah, might have been what dragged me in.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much, TD. Where can people follow your work? Do you have any articles, pieces that you want to plug? And I'll also link this in the description as well. So for those of you listening or watching, again, this will all be stuff you can go click on either during or after the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks so much for having me. It's been a really fun conversation. So all of the sort of publications and stuff I put up, it's on the Carnegie Endowment website I'm under the experts tab, which feels very presumptuous, but okay, I'm under there. You can find me.
But you're an actual expert. You're an actual expert.
I guess, I don't know.
95% of people have expert in their bio. It's like life coaches, 23-year-old life coaches. It's like you've lived. What's your expertise? So I'm honored to talk to a real expert.
Well, thank you. It feels weird though. And then I'm on Twitter at MacDonald_TD, and I post all my work there whenever I get around to publishing stuff. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you guys, talk to you soon, and see you guys next time.